And also, please start the recording on the Zoom too.
Correct. And I'm going to record it to this computer this time.
Oh, Andrew also votes on letting him in.
Okay. And it looks like our stream is up and running. I can breathe now. I'm admitting everybody. We are good to go.
Let's give it just one more minute to see if we can get Denise. I did not see her on just yet.
Correct.
Can we go ahead and start sharing the PowerPoint though, since we get that title slide up? That'd be great.
Hi folks, so I just started the recording on the Spanish channel. So Jean, whenever you're ready to start recording on the English channel, feel free to start that if you haven't done so already.
Thank you. We have started the recording as well. I'm not sure who's starting the first PowerPoint. Is that me?
I believe, Glenn, is that you for the staff PowerPoint?
I didn't really catch that. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I thought is Glenn, are you controlling the first PowerPoint for staff?
Jean's got it.
Oh, Jean, I'm sorry. Sorry about that.
I'm frantically looking for Glenn in the list.
Glenn, who's Glenn? I am so sorry.
I'm going to start that right now.
Awesome. Thanks, Jean.
Jean, I'm just letting people in. So yeah, just keep doing that.
Thanks, Bob.
Yeah.
Okay, I believe I'm sharing.
Oh, Denise just got on. I just saw her.
Fantastic. Welcome, Denise.
She's joining, so and we need to co-host her.
I hope you can see my screen.
Yes, we
See
can.
just fine.
Very good.
Okay, so it looks like we have most of our folks with us, so we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining the public workshop on the CV Salt's preliminary management zone proposals and early action plans. My name is Jessica Bean. I am the Assistant Director for the State Water Board's Office of Public Participation, and I will be facilitating today's workshop along with my colleague, Jenilyn Guzman, who you will hear from in a bit. If you are joining us through Zoom, we have oral interpreters providing simultaneous interpretation in Spanish today. So if you would like to do that, and I'm sorry, could we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. If you would like to listen in Spanish, or if you want to toggle between English and Spanish, you can do that by going to the bottom of your screen and you'll find a little small globe icon. If you click on this globe, it'll show you the available audio channels and you can select which one you'd like. Next slide, please. So we are holding this workshop virtually through Zoom. It is also being recorded and webcast publicly on YouTube. This workshop is for informational purposes and no formal action will be taken today. For all of our presenters and speakers, please remember to speak slowly to ensure the interpreters can capture today's important conversation. Later on in the workshop, there will be an opportunity for public comment. So if you know that you would like to provide a public comment today, please use the Zoom chat feature to let us know. You can type your name in there and tell us you would like to public comment at any point today. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the purpose of our goals, for our workshop today are to develop a shared understanding of preliminary management zone proposals and early action plans, and to understand the different perspectives on submitted preliminary management zone proposals and early action plans. Next slide. So here's a brief overview of our plan for today's workshop. We're going to do an overview of the program, and then we will have a management zone panel, followed by a presentation from the California Rural Legal Assistance. We will then have an environmental justice panel. After that, we will have an official public comment time. And then we're going to wrap things up today with a question and answer session at the end that is a bit of an open discussion, so folks have an opportunity to talk and clarify the different points that they've heard in the presentations today. Next slide. So as mentioned, this workshop is an opportunity to share and understand the opinions and perspectives held within this group. We have a few ground rules today to help keep the discussion as civil and productive as possible. So as we listen and participate to this workshop, please follow these ground rules. This is a public discussion, not a debate. So the purpose is not to win an argument, but to hear and respect the perspectives and ideas shared today. So please use the chat feature appropriately. We do have that active in today's meeting. So the second ground rule is to please listen actively and with an open mind. We can better understand others' perspectives when we try to see things from their lens. You can respect another person's point of view without agreeing with them. And then the third ground rule for today is to stay on point and on time. I'm sure you're all aware we have pretty limited time today to talk about a very big topic. So please respect the group's time and help give everyone an opportunity to be heard. If possible, please keep your comments brief and to the point. And when a topic has been discussed fully, do not bring it back up. All right, so now I would like to pass the mic over to Patrick and Anne to go over the CV Salts program overview.
All right, next slide. So thank you so much for the introduction, Jessica. We have Jessica Bean, obviously introduced herself from the Office of Public Participation. Jenilyn Guzman with the Office of Public Participation also was key in kind of getting this workshop together. And as you know, this workshop came about in part because the way the CV Salts submittals are structured, the early action plans and preliminary management zone proposals were submitted not quite on the board agenda timeline. And we want to get the drinking water out to communities that need it as quickly as possible. So rather than extend the timeline and have a longer than a 60-day period, we want to get the drinking water solutions out as quick as possible. So rather than have it at a full board meeting, we have the opportunity here today to have a public forum prior to the approval or the comment on by the executive officer on the preliminary management proposals and early action plans in front of the board staff. That's myself. It's also Ann Walters, the head of the CV Salts program. We have Adam Lapitz, Assistant Executive Officer in the Rancho Cordova office, board member, board chair, Carl Longley, and board vice chair now, Denise Kadara, all here to hear opinions from the team, from the folks who are working on this, from the folks who have some concerns. And we will absorb all this information, think about it as we decide on what to do next. The key date, of course, is the May 7th date when the early action plans will be kicking off, when they will start being implemented. And so at that point, we're going to make a decision about whether they are adequate or not. And so all of the information that's gathered here today will help inform that decision. So to start from square one, however, for some of the team, some of the members on the call who may not have been involved since the very beginning, CV Salts, first and foremost, it actually is an acronym, Central Valley Salinity Alternatives for Long-Term Sustainability. It's a collective effort by many stakeholders within the Central Valley community. Those include a lot of communities, those include industries, those include agriculture, those include dairies, those include municipalities with treatment works, all trying to work and fund solutions that are reasonable, feasible, and practicable for the monumental issues facing the Central Valley with respect to salinity and nitrates. Next page. Today, we're talking about one aspect of the CV Salts program, and that is nitrate, specifically nitrate contamination of groundwater and what CV Salts prescribes to do about it. As you may know, there are a lot of sources of nitrate that have contributed to the groundwater issues that we see in the Central Valley. Agriculture, through the use of irrigation, fertilizer, and manure, or irrigation with fertilizer, has contributed to nitrate issues. Industries, including manufacturing and processing, oil and gas extraction to a lesser extent, have also contributed to localized nitrate problems. Municipalities are also on the hook. Wastewater treatment plants, unless they have nitrification and denitrification, produce nitrates or ammonia in their wastewater. Biosolids and fertilizer use also contribute to the nitrate issue. And lastly, rural residents as well. Septic tanks, fertilizer use, and landfills all contribute to the nitrate problem within the Central Valley. Next slide. Here on the right, you see a map that has been used at a lot of board presentations over the years. It's a heat map showing some of the widespread nitrate issues within the Central Valley. Those red areas are the areas that we are incredibly concerned with, and the orange and yellow areas as well, in that they have relatively high levels of man-made nitrate contributions to the groundwater. And those high levels of nitrate have been accumulating over many years. They do impact drinking water. There is a profound risk to especially very, very small babies and who may be fed bottle formula made with that water. Other health effects have been documented. Bottom line, if you are over the nitrate standard of 10 milligrams per liter, there is a significant concern that we have for your health. There's significant economic costs in the treatment and in providing alternate supplies for the communities that are affected by nitrate issues within the Central Valley. And of course, there are diverse sources throughout this area. As mentioned in the prior slides, a lot of industries, a lot of productive industries contribute to the nitrate problems, and there's no easy solutions to those problems within sight. Next slide. Today, we are describing one aspect of the overall salt and nitrate control program. Click the button. If you could,
I'm
Gene,
sorry,
click.
Patrick, I don't see a button.
Next slide.
Gotcha.
There you go. And we are talking about the nitrate control program specifically. The nitrate control program provides two compliance pathways: an individual permitting approach and a management zone permitting approach. For the purpose of today's discussion, we're really going to be focusing on that management zone permitting approach, because those are the early action plans that have been submitted for the board's review. Those are the preliminary management zone proposals that have been the topic of discussion and the topic of comments. Next slide. So what are the essential elements of the nitrate control program, specifically as it applies to management zones? CV Salts was intended to provide a new way of complying with the old traditional regulatory options. And as you see in this little column here, two-column chart, there are differences under the nitrate control program. It is a departure from the way we were doing things. First and foremost, many dischargers today are not able to consistently meet water quality objectives with the current technologies at their disposal. And this is many of the agricultural sources, many of the dairy sources, many industrial sources, lots of POTWs, and a lot of the septic systems all have trouble complying with the nitrate compliance standard. Under the nitrate control program, provided that you follow the elements of the nitrate control program, there's a 35-year time frame to develop new technologies to meet these objectives. There's no approved option under the traditional regulatory approach For collective solutions, each discharger is essentially on their own, trying to comply with the nitrate objective. Under the nitrate control program, the regional board allows dischargers to organize and develop collective solutions and pool resources in these things called management zones. And thirdly, most importantly for today's discussion, under traditional regulatory options, there's no solution for impacted water users aside from the very, very clunky issuance of cleanup and abatement orders requiring replacement water. Those can get very adversarial. They're not kind of something that you kind of willingly accede to in most cases. But under the nitrate control program, using basically the same legal authority, the management zones have agreed to provide interim replacement drinking water and long-term solutions while they work on the development of new technologies that will allow them to meet objectives. This is the essential win-win in the nitrate control program, provided everything goes correctly. Next slide. And so drilling down a little further in that management zone approach, what we're talking about is shared responsibility for the implementation of nitrate solutions and drinking water solutions. When you have a source that is discharging over the nitrate standard, they can qualify for an exception, provided they do certain things that really work towards achieving compliance. One of those key things is providing safe drinking water to affected communities and residents within the area affected by the dischargers in the management zone. And this is enforced through discharge permit provisions. That's really the next step in the process, but right now we're talking about the preliminary proposals to get us started in implementing this Path B approach. Next slide. Now, the nitrate control program couldn't tackle everything all at once. Instead, the regional board divided the Central Valley Water Board up into 2 priority areas, and the remaining areas we'll essentially get to as we see priorities developing in those areas. Now, those red areas are where early action plan implementation is designed to begin in May of 2021. Sorry, that should say 2021. In the priority 2 areas, those are in orange. It's delayed by a couple of years as we get started with the most urgent areas first. And the remaining areas in green really will be addressed on a case-by-case basis, phasing it in after we deal with the nitrate compliance problems in the priority areas of the valley. Next slide. And just for your reference, these are the priority 1 groundwater basins. And these are the folks who have turned in management zone implementation plans that will be the subject of the discussions here today. Next slide. Lastly, we're going to get in a couple of the deliverables, the important key components. This is the schedule of submitting information to the board. The notices to comply were issued in May of 2020, really kicking the whole program off. Preliminary management zone proposals and early action plans are required to be submitted March 8th of 2021. The board received them and began immediate review of those management zone proposals and early action plans. Implementation of the early action plans, those drinking water replacement program, is beginning in just a couple weeks. And finally, the final management zone proposal is due in about 6 months, along with that clock has been ticking for a little while now. And then the management zone implementation plan is due in a little while as well. Really, the focus of today's discussion is the implementation of those early action plans, which is just about to begin. Next slide. Here's what's in the preliminary management zone proposals that have been submitted to the board. First, you have, and most importantly, the proposed boundaries of the management zone, the participants and the dischargers who are going to be part of the collective efforts that the management zone is going to be pushing forward, an initial assessment of groundwater conditions within the management zone, essentially the problem that we're looking to tackle, current treatment and control efforts, what's being done within the management zones as of the current date, an identification of public water supplies and domestic wells with nitrate concentrations that exceed or potentially exceed water quality objectives. You see that spelled out in the documents that have been provided to the regional board. And lastly, where necessary, an early action plan that addresses immediate drinking water needs of the communities affected by discharges in the management zones. Next slide. And here, crucially, is what is required of the early action plans, a process to identify affected residents. Outreach, and I think this is something you've heard a lot about, outreach to ensure residents have an opportunity to participate in the development of the early action plan. Also, a process for continuing to coordinate with others that are not dischargers to address these drinking water issues, not just as the early action plan is set up, but also as implementation of the early action plan continues. And this includes affected residents, water systems, environmental justice organizations, and other stakeholders. The early action plans must include a specific actions and an implementation schedule, and they must state what the funding mechanism will be for implementing the early action plan. And with that, I will turn it back over to Jessica to facilitate some of the additional presentations.
Thanks, Patrick. Actually, I think I'm going to introduce Jenilyn Guzman to come up, and she's going to take care of this section for us.
Yeah, thank you, Jessica, and thank you, Patrick. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, so thank you, Patrick, for providing that overview for today's discussion. So up next, we'll transition to the comments and opinions portion of today's workshop, where we'll hear from representatives from the management zones. We'll hear a presentation from the California Rural Legal Assistance. We'll take a short break after that before moving into our final panel, which will be with environmental justice representatives. And so at this time, we'll only be taking questions from the board members. So board members are welcome to unmute yourselves when you have a question during the presentations and the panels. But for other folks that are participating, you're still able to participate a couple of ways. You can watch on the YouTube live stream or participate in this meeting. The other way is you can chat your question into the chat box, which is on the toolbar that's at the bottom of your screen. So during any of the panels or presentations, if you have a question, feel free to drop it into the chat. Some staff will be responding to questions that may be a little bit easier to answer. So if you have a question, staff might respond to your question in the chat, but questions requiring longer discussions will be answered later during the question and answer portion this afternoon. We'll also, as Jessica mentioned earlier, have a public comment period coming up after this comments and opinions portion. So with that, I'll ask Jean to stop sharing our PowerPoint. And I'll introduce our first panel, which will include representatives from the management zones within the Priority 1 groundwater basins. And if you are a panelist for this specific panel, or for future panels and you have not been elevated to co-host, please raise your hand so Jean can give you that co-host designation. Thanks. And with that, I'll pass it on to the management zone panel. Feel free to introduce yourself and maybe let us know which management zone or organization you're representing.
I'll go ahead and get it started. Erin, you are showing it with the notes and everything. I think you need to change your display settings so we just see the one slide at a time.
Okay, hang on a second here.
Usually if you go
One
to
moment. Yeah, one moment here. So that's it. Let's go to
All right. Thank you very much. And really want to thank the Central Valley Water Board for giving us the opportunity to have this workshop today. My name is Tess Dunham. I'm an attorney at Consories and Conway. I've been involved in the development of, Erin, your screen, you changed it again.
I'm For some reason, one moment, please. Okay, got it. Here we go.
Okay. Again, Tess Dunham, actually, there we go. Okay. Central Valley Salinity Coalition, and really excited about the opportunity today to share with you all of the hard work that the management zones have done and put together in a very quick, short fashion. I know for many of us, this has been a long, what feels like a very long process in development, but since adoption and going into effect, it has moved very quickly. And I think we are all excited to be here at the point of implementation and on this, and it is a groundbreaking program. And I appreciate Patrick's comments. This is the first time that I know of, and I've been involved in this world a long time, where we have a, broad, far-reaching program from dischargers that are going forward and providing interim drinking water on a scale that we're looking at doing. And so a lot of good things are happening. With me today, we have a selection of some of the leaders from our management zones in order to provide some insight as to the work that's been going on. Instead of having them all repeat the same thing, they're each going to highlight different areas. And then, of course, they are all available for questions, for any questions that folks may have on specific management zone deliverables. So with me today, we have Perry Clausen. Perry is with the Valley Water Collaborative, which is a combined management zone program for the Modesto and the Turlock management zones. And he is helping to lead those efforts for that, as long as with many others. We also have Vicki Kretzinger-Grabert. Vicki is a engineer with Ludorf and Scalamini, and she has worked on several of the preliminary management zone proposals for a couple of the different management zones. Vicki's going to give us a little insight into the technical nature of the work that went into the PZMPs. Understand that most of our discussion today will be on the early action plans, but I think it's important to also understand some of the technical work that's also gone into the programs for the underlying basis and foundation. Sarah Rutherford, who's with the Kauai Water Foundation for the Kauai Management Zone, will be talking about education and outreach and efforts that have gone on around those issues. Sarah Wolf will be here for the Chowchilla Management Zone, talking about some early sampling efforts and where we all stand to be ready to begin implementation on May 7th. Charlotte Gallick with the Kings Water Alliance with the Kings Management Zone is going to highlight some of the challenges that we have faced and will continue to face, but how we learn to look to adapt as we move forward. And we also have with us David DeGroot, who will be available to answer any specific questions with respect to the Thule Early Action Plan. And with that, we'll go to the next slide, and I'm going to immediately turn it over to Perry Clausen. Thank you, Perry.
Yeah, thank you, Tess, and good afternoon, everyone. Very excited to be here. I, like Tess and others, have been around the table for 10 plus years, and we were there when the first time management zone was ever mentioned. So it's been satisfying to see from the concept to go to implementation steps that we're doing now. On the next slide, I want to just describe briefly what the governance is of all of these organizations.
Can we stop
Can you hang on 1 second, Perry? For some reason, the slides are not advancing. There's something strange going on here. 1 moment, please. I'm going to reboot this here. 1 second here.
If necessary, we can have Jean bring it up and have Jean advance it.
Okay, here we go. I think I got it here.
F5, we'll start it.
Here we go.
To go to,
Here we go.
there you go.
Does that work?
Yes.
Thank
Yeah, and
you.
as Tess has explained, we have formed organizations to facilitate the activities in the plans throughout these management zones. As was mentioned earlier, Valley Water handles Modesto Turlock. The remaining 4 priority basins are organized and managed by a variety of entities. It's really been interesting to watch the organizations that step forward or have been formed to manage these activities, ranging from existing ag groups or other groups to brand new nonprofits, and then some MOUs between the entities. But they've all come together to work on the plans and are ready to roll out the implementation activities as of probably end of next week. So the next slide covers the industry. So all of the industries that Patrick mentioned earlier on that have nitrates in their waste discharge requirements are participating in this process. There are some that are still trying to decide whether or not they pathway A or pathway B. But in each of our areas, the percentage of participation ranges from the high 90s to the low 90s for inclusion of these industries. Of course, some of these industries are not in the various management zones, but we are seeing excellent participation and involvement of these entities. The next slide. One thing that is important that is driving our activities, of course, is the formation of budgets. We have self-assessed each other ourselves to create the money, the funds that are needed to cover the program costs. And the challenge in all of our budgets with a new program, as this always is the case, is what is the participation level going to be? We're budgeting for the conservative high participation. The earlier activities that we did creating the plans especially were fairly straightforward, but it's really unknown how many people are going to request well sampling and the testing. But the budgets cover all the implementation costs for 20 and 21. All of us began activities last year, of course, and we are already in the planning process for 2022. So in the next slide, one thing about the participants that we have all been doing is we have agreements that have been signed by all the entities that are in our organizations to ensure that we have funding available for the current activities, but also what we expect to have in coming years. So these entities are committed to participating. They do eventually, or they do have the option of going back to the other pathway A, but so far we got commitments for the folks to stay in this pathway B. So since last summer, or last 7 months, we've really been doing a lot of work. As you see here, we organized and created these organizations. All of us have online websites. We're using social media. We started our outreach late last fall and with discussions with not only stakeholders, but communities, community organizations and residents to talk about how the plans were going to be developed and come together. We worked with the public interest organizations as well. And no doubt we have many tough challenges ahead, but we're up for the challenge. We wouldn't be here if it weren't that way. So it really is exciting to be working on this program. I started with the Irrigated Lands program almost 17 years ago, and this pales in comparison to the undertaking that we are about to start with the management zones. So next, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Vicki Kretzinger. She's going to give an overview of some of this technical work that we've all been performing in the last 7 months. So Vicki.
Thank you, Perry. So I'm going to provide a brief overview in the next couple of slides about the work being done to meet the requirements of the nitrate control program. And this includes delineating the management zone areas, including the hydrogeology of these areas, identifying the groundwater areas impacted by nitrate, including the estimated number of affected wells and the estimated affected population, and developing information about the management zone participants, including the permitted discharges who are involved in these required reports and their current nitrate management practices and treatment and control of nitrate. To develop effective solutions to the nitrate problem, the best available data were compiled to develop a preliminary estimate of where groundwater quality has been impacted. And to preliminarily identify the areas and communities affected by nitrate, we compiled existing data from many public agencies and websites, and this includes national, state, and local agencies such as DWR, U.S. Geological Surveys, State Water Board, and many others. But additionally, some data were specially requested, such as from local county departments. And these nitrate data were characterized by depth and mapped to focus on the upper zone of the aquifer system, where most domestic wells produce groundwater from. And all of this technical work provided foundational information to the preliminary management zone proposals and the early action plans. But as Perry noted, and this is just the beginning, the report submitted by the management zones entities on March 8th are just the first efforts. And these are foundational, but they are leading to the preparation of the final management zone proposal and also the management zone implementation plan. And these are key documents also required by the nitrate control program. Next slide, please. So on this slide, I'm going to touch on a brief example of some of the key work conducted for the preliminary management zone proposals that feeds into the information for the early action plans. The map of the Modesto and Turlock subbasins shown in the upper right-hand corner of this slide is an example of the preliminary maps of the estimated distribution of nitrate in the upper groundwater zone. The preliminary analyses that we've conducted also help inform data gap areas. And most importantly, these help us to identify where well testing conducted during the early action plan implementation will improve our understanding of nitrate conditions in groundwater and how to address nitrate affected areas. Other analyses that were conducted to estimate the location and number of potentially affected domestic wells and the estimated population in areas with elevated nitrate levels included estimates using two independent methods. One of these methods was estimating the well count of potentially affected wells, and this was based on available DWR well completion reports or drillers reports. The other method was based on census block data to estimate the population. Based on this information, we see that there's likely an underestimation of the potentially affected wells based on the well logs that are filed with DWR. Our population estimates for the areas that are potentially affected, showing where private water wells exist and their water sources is relatively high with nitrate compared to the number of wells in the DWR database for the same area. So the bottom line is ground truthing of well locations and the well testing to be conducted under the early action plan implementation will be needed to refine and confirm our understanding of nitrate impacted wells. The number of potentially affected domestic wells was estimated both within and also outside of the public water system boundaries. This example for the Modesto and Turlock subbasins shows a total of about 2,000 domestic wells and an estimated population of nearly 42,000 persons outside the public water system boundary. But as described in the early action plan, there are about 230 wells that are located within the public water system boundaries. So this points to the additional work needed during the early action plan implementation to identify whether domestic wells inside these public water system boundaries are being used, even though there's a compliant community water source available to these persons. So the preliminary mapping and evaluation of nitrate conditions in the groundwater underlying the management zones provides the foundation for the implementation of the early action plans, and the continued outreach and well testing that'll be implemented during the early action plans will refine the understanding of nitrate conditions in the potentially impacted residents, and it will most importantly inform water solutions to address nitrate issues. And with this, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Sarah Rutherford.
Hi, everybody. So as Patrick described, early action plans or EAPs describe outreach activities to impacted users as well as immediate and interim replacement water solutions. As management zones prepared their early action plans, they utilize guidance provided by the Office of Public Participation. Next slide. So as many of us are aware, due to COVID-19 safety orders, a majority of outreach and capacity building was conducted via virtual platforms, which included using Zoom or Facebook Live or virtual office hours. Many management zones provided materials in both Spanish and in English. and as illustrated in this slide, prepared by the Kuya Water Foundation as part of a Nitrate 101 curriculum. An event was hosted on Facebook Live, in which to date has over 380 views. Next slide. So management zones utilize various media and print communications to both build capacity and provide information to impacted users about implementation, and also to listen and receive feedback from impacted users. These various sources included working with local nonprofits, postcard announcements, social media promotion, email blasts coordinated with other local stakeholders, press releases to local media, the purchase of advertising space, presence at farmers markets or swap meets or other outdoor venues as allowed. This is expected to increase as COVID restrictions are removed. Also, program flyers were posted throughout local businesses and work with churches. Additionally, flyers and outreach materials were posted at post offices, as well as convenience stores. As illustrated in this slide, there's a variety of formats and flyers, webinars that were used, as well as partnerships with self-help enterprises and Leadership Council. Next. So all management zones are currently prepared to provide domestic well sampling and bottled water delivery in May. Other efforts are underway to determine the potential viability of construction of a water filling station. These considerations include being able to connect with a compliant water system as well as appropriate location setting. Important factors are considered such as lighting and safety and access. As some of you may know, there's an existing replacement water agreement with the State Water Board. Several irrigated lands coalitions have already constructed and are currently providing clean drinking water via these fill stations. On average, these 5 stations currently provide between 100 and 200 gallons of water per day, and there are no pre-screening criteria, which means these fill stations are available to any household or entity who are in need of clean drinking water. So we've seen where construction crews or field worker service crews can come in the morning and fill up containers to provide workers in the field with clean drinking water. And we also saw an increase in use during limited bottled water availability as COVID first hit. Additionally, many management zones have described point of use installations, and those are to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis where appropriate. So now I'll hand it over to Sarah Wolf to discuss domestic well testing.
Thank you, Sarah. In Coachella Management Zone, we were lucky enough to participate in an existing grant that was in place with Madera County and self-help enterprises to do water quality testing through 2022. And so we've been able to already distribute flyers and do a lot of outreach for free well testing, and have had a couple of well samples come back, one of which did test high in nitrates. So we were able to begin the process of delivering a clean drinking water supply to that household. But it's been a great opportunity that we can kind of work through the bugs through this existing grant and make sure that we are coordinating and having all the programs play into each other appropriately so that we can deliver the drinking water when the nitrates do pop and drinking water is necessary. So I think with that, I will turn it over to Charlotte.
Thank you, Sarah. Next slide, please, Erin. So as mentioned, there's been a lot of excitement as we launched our new organizations, new programs, new rules, new collaborators, and all of us seeing the many years of the CV SALT stakeholder development process come to fruition. And as we launched these new organizations in 7 months, it was record time. And I can say that confidently because there's nothing really to compare it to. No one has ever done this before. So we're learning from each other as management zones. We're learning from the community-based organizations. We're learning directly from community members and local governments. and also learning from other permanent dischargers. And we want to continue learning, and we want to make sure we develop a clear and consistent messaging as we conduct our outreach. It's been an iterative process, and we will continue to be iterative as needs change, as situations change, as people change. These are living documents and will be fluid and will be adaptive. Changes we see could also arise as we negotiate how to operate with the Pathway A participants in each of our zones. Next slide, please, Erin. So some upcoming challenges. I'm certain there will be a number of unforeseen challenges that will come up in this new endeavor. Here are some of the foreseeable challenges. First and foremost, the COVID restrictions. And not just because of the fact that we couldn't hold public meetings to outreach to people or participate in community events to promote the early action plan, but also because COVID is the issue that weighs heavily on people's minds. So coming up with methods to break through the outreach barriers is going to take time. It's going to take thoughtfulness and several iterations. And we also have to adapt to how COVID restrictions are changing so frequently. And really, we're uncertain about what our response rates are going to be. We'll need to change outreach strategies if our response rates are low. And we'll have to make those adaptive decisions as we move through this process. Another challenge that could cause low response rates is requesting the landowner permission for well testing. This is consistent with the current approach used by self-help. Data will need to be uploaded into GeoTracker and made public, and it's not appropriate to upload sample well data for a well in which the owner was not granted permission for the sample to be taken. Thus, we have a challenge of taking sample data and making data public versus the need to sample the well so the residents know the quality of water that they are drinking. So we are required to post results on GeoTracker. So there is a balance here to public versus private data. And we're open to discuss ideas on how we can balance this. And for this last bullet, coordinating on safer, Tess has been spearheading this effort, so I will turn the mic back over to her.
Thank you, Charlotte. And yes, a lot of questions have come to the management zones and comments that were provided both on early administrative drafts as well as the latest drafts, and really appreciate all the thoughtful comments that have been provided by the many organizations that have taken the time and effort to help provide us input. One of the biggest issues that we are facing, of course, is this program is about nitrate as well, and as part of the nitrate control program. And so the management zones have a pretty single focused responsibility, but that doesn't mean we all are ignoring the fact that there is always the potential that where you have nitrate, that there could be co-contaminants that are problematic. And we're very aware that we don't want to create a sense of safety or security for residences if we go in and test for nitrate, and let's say that it tests, below the drinking water standard. We do not want to leave any type of message to residents that means their drinking water is safe for everything. We're all aware that where we have nitrate, we often see other contaminants such as arsenic, 1,2,3-TCP, hexavalent chromium, and other drinking water standards that are very problematic. And so we have been working and having conversations with the Division of Financial Assurances at the State Water Board and others on how we can basically take our disparate programs and bring them together and make them as effective and as efficient as possible. Many people know that SB 200 created the SAFER program, which allows then for a significant amount of money available for safe drinking water. I do want to point out what many people may not know, that the reason we have SB 200 really started with CV salts many years ago, and sitting in a room where we had, folks that are at odds at each other. We all agreed that one thing that we needed to do was find funding for safe drinking water. That created a collaborative and a corresponding effort between environmental justice advocates and agriculture and others to go out and work that legislation to make the safer program happen. But with that, agriculture understands the issues with respect to nitrate and our need to take responsibility on the nitrate side. But we don't want to leave a false impression with respect to other co-contaminants. So we have been working diligently with the safer funding folks, as well as potentially technical service providers, as how we can coordinate the nitrate control programs to ensure that where we have nitrate testing going on, is there a way to make it efficient and test for other co-contaminants where this, and perhaps the safer program pays for that. We are at the point where we are close to having a draft letter. So when the management zones go out and start testing wells and providing information to the residences, that we all have an agreed on letter and message point that we all agree basically says, we're only giving you information about nitrate. There may be other contaminants, and here's a place to go in order to have other contaminants addressed. That has been working on, and it's very close to coming to conclusion. We've also been working with DFA on where we have, management zones doing work. How would we share cost with the safer program where there are co-contaminants? We've been working diligently on coming up with a cost share matrix, which again is very close to being completed. And there are conversations that are happening. Actually, some happened today, as a matter of fact, to do this as quickly and efficiently as possible so we can make sure we have these coordinated approaches. Unfortunately, things don't happen as quickly as we all would like them to happen. But, I think we are on a good trajectory in trying to have this ready to go in the very near future, and the understanding that there will be some contracting things that we need to go through as well. But the whole idea is to make sure that we can make sure the residents of the Central Valley have safe drinking water regardless of the contaminant, and how do we coordinate those efforts. So just a little bit of a update on the safer coordinated approaches. And I believe that brings us to the end of our panel, and we are available for questions. And here is, we'll leave this up a little bit, I think, during the question period. But if anybody wants to contact any of the management zone leads, here's the information that is provided. And now would like to invite all of our panelists to be available for questions that anybody may have that are specific to any of the specific management zones themselves. So I don't know if our facilitators want to facilitate that, or how you would like to do that. If Dr. Longley or Board Member Cadera have any specific questions.
Yeah, thank you, Tess. Yeah, so again, at this time, we're opening up the questions to board members. I believe we have Board Chair Dr. Carl Longley and Vice Chair Denise Cadera. But if you are a participant and you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat that you can access through your toolbox at the bottom of your screen, or you could provide your questions verbally during the question and answer portion.
Hi, this is Carl Longley. I think towards the end I will have a lot more questions. I'm interested in what some of the other folks say. However, you have a focus on refill stations, and that's good, but I have to point out, refill stations don't work for everybody. The elderly, the folks that are infirm and so forth really need delivery.
Yeah, can I clarify that, Dr. Longley? Actually, the early action plans do not, I guess I would say overall, and maybe there's an exception or two, but the early action plans themselves focus on the first line of being delivery of bottled water. And the fill stations, well, how most of the action plans are currently characterized is that they will work directly with the communities to determine if and where fill stations should be created. But actually, come May 7th, the first thing that everybody will be doing is doing well sampling testing and lining up delivery of bottled water. So I just want to make sure that that's clear, that you understand
Thank
that
you.
bottled water delivery is.
Thank you for that. Also on the point of use installations, there is a public health concern here. And I'm sure you're aware of this, and hopefully it's included in everything you do. But first of all, there are approved devices and there are unapproved devices too. But secondly, even if approved device is installed, it has to be followed up and tested on a routine basis to ensure that it's working. And I think you've addressed elsewhere some of the issues with the these POUs, if they're approved for nitrate. You have to know that there's not some of the other constituents there also. That's problematic. So yeah, those are things I think we have to keep in mind as we go down the road. I'm not saying you didn't address all of these. I'm just saying that these are things we have to, and I believe we have to keep in mind.
Absolutely. We agree with you 100%.
This is Denise Kadara. The efforts that have been put forth and working with getting the EAP program up and running, and the efforts you've done with community outreach. As you've said, there's still a lot of things that you need to do. And I would just like to suggest that you consider, in dealing with the disadvantaged populations, trying to get a meeting, or with the technology we have now to have everybody on Zoom. Some of those things don't work, but what I found out that do work, there's food distribution in many of these disadvantaged community populations, and people line up to get food. If you have flyers and information that can be disseminated in those areas where you have 40, 50 families come to collect food, people get the information. If you want people to get the information, you have to go to where the people are. And I'm just throwing that out as a suggestion, because the impact to the water for these populations is significant. That's why the red is priority, and you're looking at trying to address that. But to hone in on where the people are, I'm suggesting that you consider where you have the largest concentration of people at a time, where information can be disseminated to them. And, since the pandemic has been going on, people are always lining up to get food. And it might sound crazy, but that's where the information needs to go, where you have the largest group of people where the information can get to, and there can be that discussion amongst themselves. And then, if there's a way to follow back up with that, consider that, the health clinic. So again, I'm just throwing out things to where you really can hone in. And if the goal is to make sure we reach the people that are impacted, that these are some of the ways that you can do that. Those are my comments for now. Thank you.
Great idea. Thank you, Denise. I don't know if any of the panelists want to add anything.
Yeah, I appreciate that. We've definitely talked about that. We've even considered not only providing information at food distribution centers, but even having water available for households to pick up once we've completed their domestic well testing. So that is something we're considering, and definitely working with local healthcare clinics. As Charlotte mentioned, elevating this to the attention level that it deserves during a pandemic has been one of our challenges. So working with local health departments and clinics to allow us to have those conversations or have materials there is definitely on our list. I'd say one of the things we're working with is to gain their valuable time to have these conversations. So we found some folks were not quite willing to let us drop stuff off without having those conversations, but it's definitely something we're looking forward to.
Okay, and I would just say that recently, I helped distribute food here in our community, but we work with self-help. Emergency preparedness is an issue that we're dealing with. It relates to fires and earthquakes and all of that. They come out as we distribute food. They're providing a discussion. So before the people get their food, they have to listen to this message. But you've actually spoken to approximately 30, 40, 50 families to where the information, they hear it. They know what it's about. So that's why I'm saying, if you really want to, that's one of the places, and that's how you make a difference. And all you have to do is contact food distribution and where the food is disseminated, and contact people in those communities. If you have an intern, or get some students from the colleges that wanted to get some college credit. There are many ways of which you can help get information disseminated. And although there's the pandemic, everybody wears a mask and gloves, and we're still trying to get the word out to people about important things like this.
Yeah, Ms. Cadera, another area that we're going to focus on, you briefly mentioned too, is the schools in these areas, the communities outside of the central cities, where we go out and give a little presentation to the kids, and they can bring home flyers to their parents and get that information distributed in that way. Also, when society opens up this summer, we have the farmers markets and other fairs where where there's a high amount of traffic going through. And even in our local community, we have these food truck fairs where all the food trucks kind of gang up in a parking lot. There's 10 or 20, and there's crowds of people there. We plan to have presence in those areas as well. So we're really going to try every possible feasible way to reach these audiences, disadvantaged communities especially, and the others that are in these rural areas.
I'd like this, Carl Longley again. I'd like to mention another issue. Excuse me. In your presentation, you mentioned well testing and the owner permission issue. Every person who is being served well water has the absolute responsibility, has the absolute right to know what the quality of that water is. And, you know, that's a nut that has to be cracked. And to say that someone is going to say that, well, they own the property and therefore I don't have the right to know the quality of that water is just not acceptable.
Well, I think, you know, Dr. Longley, we absolutely understand and appreciate, you know, the challenge with that. We are all, you know, looking for some direction as well from the regional board, but we are in this situation where, you know, it is our understanding that all of the domestic well sampling that we take through our efforts as part of the program needs to be uploaded and be part of the GeoTracker database, which, you know, that's understand the need for making the data available. We have some concerns. What happens in a situation if a management zone program goes out and takes a well sample without the landowner's permission and uploads that data and information on a public database? I mean, without the landowner knowing that the sample was even being taken. So, you know, I totally understand the issue. I guess we're looking for some direction because we're a little not certain what we do here, right? Because of the expectation for the GeoTracker database requirement combined with the fact that we would then be providing information where the well owner is unaware that a sample was even taken. So we're kind of caught, we're kind of caught in the middle. And what we've done in our management zone early action plans, we followed the current protocol that we are aware of that the SAFER program utilizes, which is that they require landowner permission before, you know, even self-help using SAFER funds, as I understand it, requires landowner permission before they even go and take the well sample. So we followed the state board's approach with the SAFER program. At this point in time, if there is a shift or a change or something we can do to accommodate, you know, the issue, I think we are all ears and open to addressing that issue.
And I want to comment that the landlord technically should not be renting out a unit with water that is not safe for drinking for the renters. So that's the first issue, and how we challenge that, you know, that's something we have to deal with, but that's their responsibility to make sure that the residents have safe drinking water.
Yeah, I agree completely with you, Board Member Cadera. I think that is a, you know, much larger, you know, policy issue beyond our nitrate control program. And, you know, we would agree with you completely. You know, we're just trying to do what we need to do with respect to nitrate and, you know.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, board members, and thank you, panelists. Are there any final questions or comments that board members you would like to make, or panelists that you would like to mention before we transition to the California Rural Legal Assistance presentation? I do see a question in the chat, and we will get to that later this afternoon during the Q&A. And with that, thank you, board members, and thank you, panelists. I will now introduce the next group. We have the California Rural Legal Assistants giving a presentation. So whoever from your group is planning on sharing your screen, feel free to do that now. And when you're ready, feel free to introduce yourselves.
Okay, thank you so much. Can you hear me and can you see the presentation that I'm now sharing?
Yes.
All right, great. So thank you very much. Good afternoon. My name is Catherine Robinson. I'm a staff attorney with California Rural Legal Assistance, and I'm joined today by our legal director, Marisol Aguilar, and our partner from Santa Clara University's Department of Environmental Studies and Sciences, Associate Professor Iris Stewart-Frey. So I want to thank the board for providing us with this opportunity to share some key points from our public comments and research on the nitrate control program. So we won't have time to discuss all the issues that we covered in our comments. So if you'd like to read more, they're available online as part of the public record. So this is a list of some of the key issues with specific asks for the Central Valley Water Board from our public comments that we want to discuss today. The first three that Professor Stewart-Frey will cover relate to the data and process transparency, and the remaining four issues I'll discuss relate to implementation and compliance issues. So I will hand it over to Professor Stewart-Frey.
Thank you, Catherine, and hello and good afternoon, everybody. Are you able to hear me? Yeah, okay, great. Can you put on the next slide? Thanks, Catherine. I would like to start off by thanking all of you for being here and the organizers for the opportunity to present. And in the interest of time, I will jump right into this presentation. As Catherine outlined, I'll be talking about why data and analysis transparency, more frequent well testing, and more information on nitrate loading are key to better protect public health and particularly underserved communities. And these three issues are connected, so I will be addressing them in an integrated way. Next slide, please. I would like to quickly start out with a very brief overview on why nitrate concentrations in groundwater vary so much. I realize we have people with very different backgrounds here on this call, but then also making the point why it is therefore important to get and share as much information as we can. The most obvious reason for different nitrate concentrations in different places is, of course, the rate of application. Wherever nitrate is applied at higher rates and more frequently, we expect to find more in the groundwater. But once the nitrate is in the soil, there are also a number of processes that can distribute it in different ways. Let's take a look at the black and white figure on the lower left in the slide here. This is from a paper by Bureau et al. From 2008. The figure is showing a cross-section of the subsurface near Modesto. And the different layers that you see in shades of gray are indicating groundwater of different ages, meaning that in each of these layers, water, and therefore the nitrate that it's transporting, may be traveling at different rates and in different ways. And the vertical lines represent wells. Because they are of different lengths, they might be sampling different parts of the aquifer system. And nitrate levels measured in these wells may be very different, even if the wells are located close together. And the figure in the upper right is from another paper by Bastani and Harder, 2019. And the colors in that figure represent that there are different soils and sediments that are present in the underground material. That's happening on very small but also larger scales. And different material will transport this water and nitrate in different ways on these smaller and larger scales. So the consequences of this variability in nitrate loading, geologic material, and in the water and nitrate flow and transport is that we have some uncertainties about the exact nitrate concentration at a location at a given time. And we're going to reduce these uncertainties with more information. Therefore, in order to protect public health most effectively, we need as much monitoring and data sharing in space and time as possible so that we can reduce nitrate loads in areas where well nitrate concentrations are the highest, and we have the best possible understanding of that. Next slide, please. Catherine, oh, thanks. In this context, my collaborators from CRLA and I, we advocate for true transparency in data and analysis. What is currently specified in the early action plan is that the analysis is grounded on publicly available data. And much of that publicly available data is stored in the Gamma database and the GeoTracker, which both of whom have been mentioned here. But there are other often more local sources for the different management zones. And in particular, we know this because we've been working with the data sources that are specified for the Modesto management zones. And these additional data sources are often much more difficult to obtain for communities and community groups. In addition, every time that you're integrating different databases for analysis, you're making some choices on how to include and clean up data and what kind of parameters you use for your analysis and what kind of tools. And these choices, are perfectly reasonable, but there may be some differences between them, and so they might lead to some differences in the results. So here in the slide, what you see is 3 heat maps on nitrate concentrations in Stanislaus County. The bottom one is from the Modesto Management Zone Early Action Plan, and the 2 upper ones are heat maps that we made from the data that we could obtain, which is not the same as the one listed in the sources. And they're only for smaller areas right around the city of Modesto. The differences between the 2 top maps is that there's a different parameter value that was chosen for the interpolation part of the data, which is like the practice to figure out what the concentrations are in between specific monitoring points. And you can see that the maps in general look very similar, but there are also some important differences. For example, the red dot or the red area on the left of each map is smaller in the left map and then in the right map. And this might make an important difference for an individual whose drinking water is coming from a well in that region. So to be clear, our request here is not for more work or for more resources from the management zone collaboratives. What we're asking for is that the databases that are being built in the process already, and the analysis that's being conducted for the management zone reports, that the work that's done already and into all the work that has been put into that be made publicly available in the interest of transparency to communities and community organizations. At this point, they're not being consistently shared. Our experience is that we asked for those databases for the Modesto Management Zone and that our request was denied. So next slide, please. Just quickly, a couple more slides, which are from our own analysis of the Gamma database information for Stanislaus County. The first here is showing nitrate concentrations with well depth, indicating that concentrations are much higher at some depths than others, mostly shallow depths below 100 feet. Next one, please. And here we're following 4 wells in Stanislaus County with a relatively high monitoring frequency. So on the y-axis, there's nitrate concentrations. On the x-axis, there's date. So this is monitoring between 2010 and 2020. All of these 4 wells are shallow from less than 100 feet depth. And you see that nitrate concentrations here might change significantly from year to year, but also within a given year. So sometimes maybe above the maximum contaminant level and sometimes below. And next slide, please. And here we're looking at seasonal concentrations of all shallow wells in Stanislaus County between 2010 and 2020. And there seems to be some evidence that concentrations are higher in spring and fall than winter and spring. Winter and summer, excuse me. These differences might be due to either the timing in loading or the timing of water flushing. But in any case, the results shown on this and the previous slides do suggest that more than annual testing would be needed and beneficial to understand the seasonal variability of nitrate concentrations. Next slide, please. So in summary, we propose to strengthen the following elements of the management plans and the CV salts process. We request full transparency on data sources used and the analysis from the management zones to communities and community-based groups. This would be best achieved through making databases that were built and tools and parameters used for analysis available for download. Again, this is not asking for additional work or analysis, only to make available what is already being produced. And we believe that this transparency will improve both accountability and trust in the process, and is also consistent with the scientific process. And then based on our preliminary analysis, we also request more frequent well testing that takes into account the seasonality of nitrate concentrations and more information on nitrate loading. And with that, I'd like to turn the mic back over to Catherine.
Right, thank you so much, Iris. And also a big special shout out to our student researcher, Lila Foster, for her help with this important research. So first, I'll give some background information about CRLA. We are a statewide nonprofit law firm serving over 40,000 low-income residents each year with matters ranging from landlord-tenant disputes and access to safe housing to land use inequities and environmental burdens. So I will now discuss the remaining 4 issues on our list today. In our comments, we argued that in order to ensure successful implementation of the nitrate control program, this Central Valley Water Board should remove early action plan and preliminary management zone proposal restrictions on tenants from receiving well sampling and point of use system installation, require water fill stations be installed as an immediate replacement solution, make it a requirement for management zones to meaningfully consult with the community, and add additional compliance and enforcement mechanisms to ensure management zone accountability. But first, we know, and as the data shows, that low-income communities, particularly Latinx communities in the San Joaquin Valley, are disproportionately impacted by high levels of groundwater nitrate contamination than the population at large. And these communities are more likely to live in areas where nitrate groundwater levels are high and are more likely to live in areas not connected to public water systems. And low-income families are more likely to be renters and lack income to test and treat their own well water. So it is these communities that stand to benefit the most from the nitrate control program. But despite this fact, several of the plans that we reviewed impose unnecessary restrictions on tenants seeking service. At present, several management zones require renters to obtain written consent, as has been discussed already, from their landlord prior to any water sampling being conducted and prior to the installation of any point of use water filtration system. These requirements are unnecessary and contrary to the Basin Plan Amendment language. Removing these unnecessary requirements for low-income tenants is critical to the success of the nitrate control program, because low-income tenants face a series of compounding issues that make it very difficult and at times impossible to obtain their property owners' consent. Failure to remove these requirements will result in significant delays in the implementation process. It'll prevent critically needed data collection, prevent residents from accessing safe drinking water, and impede the goals of the nitrate control program. If they remain, a significant percentage of low-income tenants that rely on contaminated wells in the management zone will be unable to participate in the program. Based on empirical research and our direct work with low-income tenants throughout the Central Valley, we know this will be the case for several reasons. First, the lack of affordable housing dramatically shifts the scales of power in favor of landlords. Excuse me 1 second. There we are. According to the California Housing Partnership, there are approximately 212,753 lower income renter households in the San Joaquin Valley, and 2/3 of them do not have access to an affordable home. So without alternative housing options, low-income tenants have less leverage to negotiate with their landlords and are more likely to endure uninhabitable or poor housing conditions. And this is especially so for households with families of mixed immigration status. Further, in 2018, we at CRLA conducted our own client survey and received over 2,000 responses. The results showed in Stanislaus County that 44% of tenants experienced habitability issues, and 63 of those that experienced landlord retaliation were because they raised habitability concerns to their landlord. So fear and retaliation of eviction is real, and many low-income tenants will not feel comfortable requesting written consent. So going back to this slide again, another issue is that tenants may not even know that know who the property owner is, and may in fact pay rent to a third-party agent. In this common circumstance, the tenant may not have access to the property owner's contact information and would therefore be prevented from receiving nitrate control program services. Also, potential language barriers, illiteracy, or disability may also prevent a tenant from contacting their landlord. And with respect to point of use installation, there's no sufficient justification for management zones to require prior consent. Installation of a filter is simple and is no more invasive than the installation of wireless internet that requires a service provider to drill a hole in the wall of a resident. But in that circumstance, a written consent from a landlord is not needed. So for these reasons, well testing and the interim replacement water program must be designed to ensure residents are able to access safe drinking water as quickly as possible and without administrative barriers, prohibitive administrative barriers, excuse me. And the board should require management zones to remove these restrictions from their plans. The Central Valley Water Board has the legal authority to do this. The Basin Plan amendments clearly state that the residential well sampling program must identify affected residents within the management zone and that such sampling shall occur only with the consent of the current resident. So it clearly states current resident may give consent for water sampling, and it further refers to affected residents throughout, which would not include landlords that live off of the affected property. So therefore, the Basin Plan amendments do not distinguish between renters and property owners, and the management zones should not be permitted to do so either. Further, the California Safe Drinking Water Act also explicitly includes renters in its definition of resident. In addition, Water Code Section 13627A and C also provide support that enable the board to allow tenants to consent to sampling and point of use installation. This code gives the board the authority to investigate the quality of any waters of the state within its region and provides that when the board conducts an investigation, it may inspect the facilities of any person with the consent of the owner or possessor of the facilities. Legal possessor includes renters, or if the consent is withheld, the board may obtain a warrant to conduct the investigation. And furthermore, the board may also conduct an investigation without obtaining consent or a warrant in the event of an emergency affecting public health or safety. So as to this latter point, this is clearly a public health emergency. The purpose of the nitrate control program is to remediate the devastation that nitrate contamination is having on the groundwaters in the San Joaquin Valley. And throughout the Basin Plan amendments and the CV salts program development and materials, the levels of nitrate contamination have been described as a significant public health issue requiring urgent action. So in this way, the board has the authority to enable management zones to conduct wells with the consent of the renter, and this is clearly a public health emergency. In addition, the board has the authority to require management zones remove provisions requiring written permission from a property owner for point of use installation, as that is not an investigation. So in sum, written consent of the owner is not required for well testing and point of use filters. We also stated in our comments that the board should provide multiple options to make the nitrate control program services as accessible as possible, including requiring management zones to allow residents to obtain their own water tests and submit results to management zones to qualify for interim water replacements and to contribute to the data collection. Management zones could provide a list of labs where residents can take their tests to get results. They can mail test kits to residents directly. The resident can then follow the provided directions and then mail the test kit back. This would be no different than what medical facilities currently do for lab tests. And this would help residents that maybe feel uncomfortable with the idea of someone coming into their home or have any other hesitancy towards participating. So the idea is to make testing as easy as possible and allow the broadest number of residents participate in the program. We also stated that management zones should use available public records to contact property owners directly. Given the barriers described, all efforts should be made to reduce the burden on renters. And in addition, written materials and presentations should clearly indicate options for property owners and tenants. And materials should include a list of local CBOs or community-based organizations that agree to have their contact information provided in the event that a landlord-tenant issue does occur. And these options should be written into each of the management zones' plans. So fifth, we also urge the Central Valley Water Board to require that management zones provide water fill stations that are available 24/7 throughout rural areas within the first 60 days of the early action plan implementation. So while we agree that community input should be prioritized to determine the preferred solution, management zones, as has already been discussed, have not been able to obtain such input primarily because of COVID and social distancing restrictions, and outreach was primarily limited to online meetings. Therefore, water fill stations can provide an immediate solution while management zones continue to gather community input. And further, water filling stations provide an important solution for people experiencing homelessness and residents that are unable or unwilling to enter into a contract with a service provider for bottled water delivery. We're also aware that water vending stations are another viable option and should also be considered. So number 6, at present, the Basin Plan Amendment urges management zones to meaningfully consult with affected residents and community stakeholders. And we urge the Central Valley Water Board in our comments to make this a requirement. This can be done, for example, by requiring management zones expand their board of directors and subcommittees to include affected low-income management zone residents and include representatives from stakeholder groups, and as well requiring management zones make a showing in their quarterly progress reports of efforts taken to work closely with these groups. Finally, we also urge the board to add additional compliance and enforcement mechanisms to ensure management zone accountability as a means to balance out the broad discretion that's currently provided in management zones. And in the interest of time, I'll just name a couple. The first one, review early action plans annually. At present, the early action plans are only required to be evaluated once every 2 years by the board, but annually, more regular oversight should be required. As well, to establish a procedure for residents to submit confidential complaints and designate a compliance officer to respond to those complaints. And then as well, really important is to require management zones conduct internal audits and publish progress reports on a quarterly basis. And these quarterly reports should detail the outreach of efforts and outcomes, program implementation progress, including how many people access water fill stations, bottled water delivery, points of use filters, and how many decline services. And all of this reporting should be tracked and made public. So to summarize briefly, the nitrate control program is a critically important program and we all want to see it succeed. And so to ensure its success, the board must require full data and analysis transparency for management zones, require nitrate load information, which is critical to understanding the scope of contamination, that it be provided in a timely manner. The board should require more frequent and robust well testing to ensure data accuracy and identification of potentially contaminated wells, require management zones remove any provisions requiring tenants obtain consent from the property owner, require management zones install water fill stations or vendors as an immediate solution, require management zones take specific actions to ensure meaningful consultation with community stakeholders, and then add additional compliance and enforcement mechanisms to ensure management zone accountability. And so with that, thank you for your time. I hope that we didn't go too long, and we're happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you, Iris. So I'll turn it over to board members if you all have any questions. For folks participating and you have a question, feel free to drop it into the chat.
Hi.
And
This is Carl Longley again. I appreciate the presentation, the variability of nitrate concentrations. I think the board certainly is well aware of that. And actually, it's much more complicated even. That was even presented, particularly when you look between west sides and east sides of the valley. Tremendous amount of clay we have on the west side, clay stratas confound that further. That's why we're very interested in having source sampling and frequent sampling after that, because real-time data is the best of all. But I compliment you for your comments and thank you.
Yes, I would just comment that it was stated in the last presentation, with the Wi-Fi and cable and all of that is able to be installed without the owner's presence, that we also look at doing the same thing with water, as we talked about earlier in the testing. And then also with the compliance officer that was suggested, I think that's a good idea. And I would say that the annual reporting would only be required if the compliance officer has certified that the management zones are meeting all of the requirements that are there. So it sounds like it's a little bit more work for the management zones, but if we want to do our due diligence and make sure that we are providing safe drinking water and addressing those issues, that we should have no problems in monitoring what we're doing. And once a year will not address all of the issues. As Dr. Longley said, there's clay, there's different parts of the aquifer where at different times nitrates may be more concentrated in certain areas. So let's look at how we can best address the needs of this nitrate issue and serve the populations that are impacted and not further impact them. Those are my comments at this time.
Great, thank you, board members. Catherine and Iris, any last minute or final comments or responses?
I think there was another question in the chat, whether the regional board is effectively not acting as the compliance officer. Is that something that the board would want to address, or something that should be responded to? Not by me, but.
Well, I'd ask Executive Officer Patrick Paloopa to address that.
Yeah, no, I heard that. I think this is kind of one of the first times I've seen that option. The board can't delegate its compliance and enforcement authority. So realistically, the steps as we outlined in the initial presentation would be that this program eventually makes its way into waste discharge requirements. The waste discharge requirements themselves will form the backbone for how we will enforce compliance with these options. So delegating a compliance officer would be nice if the management zones elect to do that, but I think that ultimately, we can't kind of make deputies out there. It's the regional board's compliance and enforcement team that will be doing the oversight of these.
Yes, but how, Patrick, my question would be, if that's going to be in the waste discharge requirements, is there a way that this discussion could fit into that as far as compliance?
Oh, absolutely. No, that's I think that's exactly what I'm saying.
Okay.
These provisions, our compliance enforcement unit works with the Office of Enforcement, reviews waste discharge requirements, reviews comments from the public, really tries to make everything that we put in permits effective and clear, not just to the board's enforcement team, but to permittees, to really outline exactly what the expectations are.
Okay, so in that regard, are we still looking at just an annual reporting, or how would that work as we've discussed about the different levels of concentration of nitrates? And, it could happen more than just an annual thing. It could be a problem with nitrates in the water before the next annual reporting, or every 2 years is what I've heard is the issue, the requirement.
So there are so many requirements within waste discharge requirements that are required to be reported on a more regular basis. I think that some of the presentation intermixed some of the nitrate load reporting that would happen under the permit with some of the mandatory reporting to the state board and to the regional board. Most of the permits require monthly or quarterly reporting. And when this gets wrapped up into the actual management zone implementation provision, it's going to be a lot more than just a single report coming to the board every year. A lot of the details and a lot of the reporting will be much more frequent than that, as they currently are. I don't know if there's a single permittee in the Central Valley that only reports to the regional board on a yearly basis.
Okay. Thank you.
And Patrick, that's why I asked you to explain that. That's much more comprehensive than I could do.
I would, you know, as we kind of get into the discussion, I think one of the points that I'm be curious to hear about was the management zones and their consultants talk a little bit, and this is kind of just to bookmark it on the data transparency issue, to hear a little bit about what their feedback is, because it is mostly public data that was used, and because really we're just targeting the areas in which we have to do additional sampling. And that sampling will be uploaded into GeoTracker. I'd invite additional comments on that as we kind of move forward. The owner consent issue, I think at the board is absolutely very, very well aware of. I responded a little bit in the chat. We certainly do have that authority that was outlined under 13267. It is, I mean, if you want to get something done in 2.5, 3 years, that's the avenue to go down. There are numerous different due process concerns that are raised when the board is issuing a compliance order and then executing a warrant. In addition, it is incredibly expensive. I know the state board is looking at this, local health departments are looking at this. I think it is shocking, frankly, to many people that single domestic wells are not regulated, that they're not regulated in so far as to what the water quality is, and a landlord can be serving a well to their lessees that is not compliant with nitrate or other requirements, and there is not a mandatory testing element required by the state of California. As the position that we're in, we're continuing to work with the State Water Board, with CDPH on concepts to change that. But it is obviously a political issue that will be decided by the legislature. I don't want to kind of defer responsibility there. We absolutely know that that's the right thing to do, and we'll continue to work in that area. But it is a sensitive issue, and I do not think that we necessarily have the legal authority to do that quickly, and certainly in the rapid manner that this is requiring. But that said, even if we move forward with the management or the early action plans as they're stated right now, this is absolutely an issue that our staff will continue to look into, our legal staff will continue to look into, and frankly, our legislative staff will continue to engage on as we move forward. But that's just a couple things. I know there's additional things on the agenda. I don't want to usurp the agenda too much, but I just want to flag those particular issues for future discussion.
Thank you for that, and I'll digress, or I'll leave it open because I don't want to take up too much time as well, and definitely understand that this is an issue that is being covered, extensively by the board and has been discussed quite a bit. It's not an easy one. We have differing opinions and about the legal authority, and there, I do want to very quickly touch on the issue about that was raised previously before our presentation, though, about the issues of privacy and GeoTracker. The main focus, of course, is to get people clean water, and that perhaps another option that may be discussed in terms of the GeoTracker is that that's an option in which you would have the property owner's consent, that if the person's information is going to be put up on there, that would be take the avenue for requiring consent from the owner before putting it on GeoTracker. But in terms of the well testing, that it would, the current resident, the tenant, would be sufficient. But I just wanted to add that because I know it was an issue that was brought up earlier that I didn't touch on.
Yeah. And it's still public. I mean, even if it isn't up on GeoTracker, it's still public as soon as we get that information. So I know the concern is magnified when it goes up on a geospatial database, but we still have the lat long as reported from the lab when we get that information into the board that somebody could query. So that's why there's not an easy solution. There's not an easy solution there. But again, I appreciate your advocacy here.
And Patrick, you invited some feedback from the management zones on the data and analysis transparency. So I was wondering if we could follow up on that.
I'll let Jessica and Jenna Lynn kind of talk on that, whether we want to do that now or we want to move forward. Let them facilitate, but certainly.
Yeah, I think that we want to make sure that we're staying on track. I know, Perry's had his hand up for a second, and maybe we could, I don't know if you had a follow-up to the discussion at hand, Perry.
Yeah, I'll just make a quick comment on the data availability and the analysis that we were required to prepare for this plan. And just the point to emphasize is that was a requirement. I think it was good. We updated the data, but the management zone program is making available well testing and free bottled water to anyone in the management zone. Whatever the maps say is guidance for priority areas in our minds. And anyone can come in from a green area and say, we'd like a well test, and we will comply. And if their well is above the standard, they will be provided bottled water. So I think that's an important distinction. I know the scientists and the data people will you'll see our data that we get from our tests as it's updated for the uses that scientists like that data for. But other than a public water system, anybody can apply. And our policy, I'm not sure about the other management zones, if there's a sample that's in the 7 to 10 range, we are committing to come back in 12 months to resample the well. So we get this change in the levels of nitrate, and we'll be following up. But I just wanted to make that point that anybody's eligible can apply for testing, and if they have exceedance, then they get bottled water.
Thanks, Perry. And I don't want to cut off this conversation, but we do have some time set aside for discussion. So this topic may make sense to bring up later at that time as well. I do want to make sure we can get to, we have another panel of presentations. But I think now we should take a short break. Let's see, gentlemen, what do we have for our break?
We have 10 minutes.
Okay, well, let's just go ahead and round everything up. How about everybody come back at 2:50? Does that sound good? I guess I'm assuming you're nodding your heads because I don't see most of your video right now, but I'm going to assume that's a yes. And so yeah, if everyone could please be back at 2:50 and we'll continue.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. The time is now 2:50. So again, thank you to our last panelists and board members for the discussion. Our next panel will be with environmental justice representatives. So just to make sure that all of the panelists are back, please raise your hand or turn your camera on. So I see Debbie, Natalie, awesome. So whenever you're ready, feel free to share your screen and start with introductions. And I will just say a friendly reminder, we are doing translation or interpretation, simultaneous interpretation. So feel free to take your time with your presentation so that we can make sure our translator or interpreter can keep up. So thanks.
Thank you so much. I believe we're having Jean run the PowerPoint for us.
Sure, which one is it?
The CV Salts EAP workshop with Community Water Center, Leadership Council, and Clean Water Action.
I got it.
Thank you.
There you go.
Great, and I'll turn it over to Natalie to kick us off.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Natalie. I'm here along with Debbie, and I'm so sorry I can't pronounce your name properly.
It's Godo.
Okay, Godo. To have a presentation on the EAP workshop on environmental justice panel. Next slide, please. So as I already said, my name is Natalie. I'm a water policy coordinator for Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability. Debbie is a senior attorney with Community Water Center, and Godo is a water policy analyst with Clean Water Action. Next slide, please. All right. So on community engagement, EAP state that potentially affected residents identified will be the focus for direct outreach through the EAP implementation. Our sense is that there was little engagement with impacted residents throughout the development of the EAPs. While some management zones have committed to form advisory committees, we need to ensure that these committees have representation of impacted residents on them. In order to keep impacted residents informed, management zones should produce regular progress reports on engaged households and solutions implemented. These reports should be produced at least quarterly and should be shared with impacted residents. Additionally, we have raised this point numerous times that translation services must be provided. Some of the most impacted residents are not English speakers. If management zones want to proactively engage these residents, translation services are critical, and all distributed material must also be made available in multiple languages. What we want to see throughout implementation is effective outreach and engagement in conducting well testing and identifying households impacted by nitrate pollution. And once problems are identified, selecting drinking water solutions that work for households and communities. Last, outreach must be conducted by trusted messengers who know the communities and the languages spoken by residents. Next slide, please. As per outreach to impacted residents, some EAPs stated that potentially affected residents identified will be the focus of direct outreach throughout the EAP implementation. They also included plans to develop information to send to each resident target for outreach. To ensure outreach efforts reach impacted residents, we ask that management zones conduct additional outreach for targeted residents when residents are unresponsive to initial mailers. Such outreach activities may include a second mail out unless previous mailed information was returned as undeliverable, targeted door-to-door canvassing, setting up information booths at local farmers markets and other local community events, or by other methods as recommended from discussion with key community leaders and organizations. Our experience has been that mailed information gets a very low response rate, and consistent door-to-door outreach and outreach at in-person events when they resume will be needed. Additionally, it's also critical that management zones conduct outreach and offer well testing to households in areas where the upper zone is expected to exceed 1.5 milligram per liter of nitrate. We appreciate that in response to comments, several management zones have changed their EAP to target outreach areas that exceed this. Next slide, please.
On the coordination with SAFER, we appreciate the updates that Tess provided earlier on coordination between the SAFER program and the management zones. It is helpful to hear that progress has been made and a cost-sharing metric is near completion. Simply put, we are interested in seeing an integration between these two programs, that is the SAFER program and the management zones. And while we understand that the purpose of the EAP is to provide interim safe drinking water under the nitrate control program, our organizations are really pushing for coordination with SAFER because this provides an avenue to actually protect residents from other contaminants that might exist, like arsenic, uranium, 1,2,3-trichloropropane, or more that might be present in their drinking water. And one of the main concerns we have is that testing for domestic wells for only nitrates or providing a POU based on only a nitrate test can provide a false sense of security among impacted residents that their water is good to go or safe for drinking. And this is essentially why we want to see these programs happen simultaneously from May 7th. And these recommendations were made repeatedly in our comment letters on the draft and the final plans. We want this agreement to happen sooner rather than later. And secondly, on the Modesto Tuluk EAP, they specifically stated that they had initiated ongoing discussions with California Rural Water Association on developing a cost-sharing agreement for sampling coal contaminants. Would like to get an update on that and if an agreement has been reached at this stage. I think finally on this coordination with SAFER, we also want to recommend an agreement and collaboration with community-based organizations like self-help enterprises. These are an organization that is well vested in community work, and their services will be essential for well testing and for outreach. I think overall, we want to see this coordination because it's important to the success of this nitrate program, and people deserve to know exactly what is in their drinking water. Next slide, please. Implementation budgets. As we saw during the management zone panel presentation, they stated that most management zones have they have budgets to cover the cost of their implementation program. We expected to see this implementation budget in the EAPs that were submitted. I think having a budget that details the cost analysis for replacement water for impacted residents, cost for outreach and capacity building, the cost for domestic well testing and operational costs is essential for transparency and clarity. Our organizations believe that it's important for the management zones to include this in their plans. And the general idea for us requesting this is for transparency on the scope of the management zone's responsibilities. We want to have a good understanding of the funding mechanism for this program and if it's meeting the allocated tasks. Each of the management zones in their plans actually included just a brief description of funding mechanisms. So would like them to have a budget in place if they don't have one, and then include that in their plans. And I think this is important because it gives us an idea of how many residents you're planning to provide this interim drinking water solution to, and for how long that would be. And if there's need for additional funds through the process, how that need will be met. So this is important for us to see in your plans. Next slide, please.
So I think this issue has been discussed at length, earlier, and really appreciate the conversation that's been happening so far. So I'll go through this pretty quickly, but just reiterating what our colleagues at CRLA and the board members have spoken already, that tenants must be allowed to obtain testing if this is a requirement for bottled water. To require otherwise excludes quite a number of impacted residents from obtaining solutions that work best for them. They'll be forced to rely upon kiosks, which may not work for them because they might not be able to access the kiosk. They might not be able to carry 5-gallon jugs. There's a whole host of reasons why people might not be able to access kiosks. So making it easier for people to get bottled water deliveries is really critical. Some alternate processes, they've been discussed earlier, if the landlord permission cannot be obtained, whether that's either because the landlord is unresponsive or unwilling to allow testing, is testing at the tap and providing the results just to the tenant, or allowing self-test kits. But really, Tess I appreciate, Tess mentioning that they're working on a letter to make clear what this testing looks like. We would appreciate being able to, we would love to help out and make sure that this is something that is as clear as possible to residents, but obviously we prefer not needing that because we'd have a coordination with SAFER. So next slide, please. So Godo mentioned this briefly about we needing to have this continued testing for more than just nitrate in order to prevent false senses of security in terms of your water. We are also urging the regional board to not allow point of use devices to be used where testing for only nitrate has occurred. Some contaminants can impact the efficacy of the point of use devices for nitrate, so that even nitrate's not being filtered out, as well as a filter for nitrate is not filtering out other contaminants. So someone might have water that's free from nitrate, but they're now consuming arsenic, TCP, or any other contaminants that are in their water. So this can't be something that is permitted. And I know at least one of the management zones are proposing to permit this. And in terms of follow-up testing for wells between 7.5 and 10 and right up to the MCL, while we appreciate that the management zones, many, if not all of them, are planning on doing repeat testing, especially where the nitrate levels are right up to the MCL, maybe right below it. Testing annually is going to miss at least some exceedances. And since we are talking about an acute contaminant here that can cause pretty severe impacts right away for some vulnerable, especially for vulnerable populations, testing annually is going to miss some of those fluctuations, and fluctuations are normal. So there needs to be more frequent repeat testing, especially for nitrate levels that are very close to the MCL. And one thing that I want to reiterate something that CRLA mentioned was the concept of vended water. This was a concept of having vended water stations that was discussed at length during the pilot process. Our organizations were involved, CWC, Leadership Council and Clean Water Action, participated in the pilot projects that happened in the Turlock and Kings areas. And vended water was something that was discussed. So having a station where you can drop off your empty 5-gallon jug and pick up a new one. And yet we didn't see this in any of the EAPs submitted, and wondering why those were not being considered. They'd be easier to implement more quickly than kiosks. Again, these solutions, though, all need to be developed in conjunction with communities. So if communities want something like a vended water or kiosk, or if they want a kiosk, but there's no nearby system that has safe water or willing site, then a vended water station might be the more appropriate. And yet it doesn't appear that any of the management zones are currently considering those. Next slide, please. So we just wanted to, when we submitted our letters, we submitted a joint letter for most of for all the management zones minus Thule, and we pulled Thule out. In our review of the Thule EAP, they have all the issues that we've already outlined. But there was really no outreach to impacted communities. There was one meeting held that was only noticed over their interested parties list. How someone is supposed to know to be on the interested party list if you don't do outreach to begin with is an issue. And then they did attend, and we appreciated that they attended an AGWA meeting we invited them to. But that's not sufficient outreach. The AGWA meeting was attended by residents throughout the valley, not just in the Thule management zone region. Further, their early action plan appears to be just a reiteration of their obligations under the replacement water settlement with the State Water Board. That replacement water settlement requires the installation of 3 kiosks that were supposed to be installed by January 31st, 2020. And there was supposed to be bottled water provided to anyone who was unable to access a kiosk. And that standard was interpreted by the state board very broadly, very liberally. So anyone who maybe their work schedule doesn't permit them to access a kiosk, they could ask for bottled water delivery. However, the EAP inappropriately states that the management zone will have the ability to determine if bottled water or point of use is the quote most appropriate solution for a household. That is not the management zone's responsibility or authority. The communities are supposed to be the ones who are determining what is their most appropriate solution. And while we understand that, a community might want a point of use system, but if there is co-contaminants that would preclude the ability to use a point of use, that's something that needs to be discussed and can't be implemented, but it's not appropriate for any of the management zones to make the sole determination as to what is the appropriate solution for one's household. Next slide, please. Natalie?
Yeah, so in summary, we're asking for more proactive community engagement and accountability. The Office of Public Participation developed excellence guidance that should aid management zones in conducting effective and meaningful outreach and impact households and communities. We want to see more details on implementation budgets. Troubleshooting landlord-tenant issues will be critical to move forward with well testing. We want to see active engagement with the SAFER program to facilitate well testing. And as per our letters, we are suggesting Modesto, Turlock, Chowchilla, Kings, Kauai be conditionally approved. Thule should not be approved as it is incomplete and does not comply with the State Water Board's approval resolution for the basin plan. A new plan must be submitted within 60 days to the extent possible. This should not delay implementation of drinking water solutions. And we can move on to questions and answers.
Great, thank you all. So I'll turn it over to board members if you have any questions or comments. And for participants, if you have any questions, now feel free to drop it into the chat, or we can wait until the question and answer portion coming up later this afternoon.
Again, I'm supporting the budget information for transparency's sake. I think if we want our programs to be successful, that our tasks are successfully being implemented, providing that information and what we're doing, how we're doing the outreach to the community, what we're proposing, that it is spelled out in the budget. And I think along those lines, and most importantly, if the EAP programs are here to address the issues of nitrate in the water, we really want to focus on making sure that the communities are at the table. They should not be dished out what the management zones think they need to have, because we wouldn't be here in the first place if we did not have nitrates in the water. So I'm really wanting to make sure that the EAP programs do their due diligence and make sure that the residents are helping to guide this implementation process. It should not be the other way around. So those are my comments. And I also want to throw out the question, the management zones for the areas that exceed the high priority areas that exceed in nitrates over the 10 milligrams per liter, that have you given any thought to installing any water systems for those particular households and those areas where it's significantly higher versus the bottled water and the kiosks? We're talking about interim solutions, and we don't want to expend all of the money on plastic because that's what the water is going to come in, although we have kiosks. But I continue to remind everyone that this issue of water coming out of the tap, no one likes to have to go out and pick up their water from someplace else. When they rented or bought their unit, water, quality drinking water came out of the tap. So since we're having issues with that, and for those areas that are far in excess of what the levels are, I'm asking, have you given any consideration to providing any alternative systems into the units for which could potentially be a cost savings in the long term versus the bottled water? So those are just some of my comments I have at this time.
Denise, do you want me to answer that now, or?
Well, I'm throwing it out. It can be discussed later on.
Yeah, whatever. I'll lead it to the facilitators. Let me know what you would like me to do.
You can go ahead and answer, Tess. We have some time.
Okay, so, and I think, Denise, just so I understand the question, when you say systems, are you talking about household systems? Or are you talking about some other, small community system? Just so I understand when you say water system, what you're referring to. So
I could be talking. It could be a household system,
okay,
or it could be a community system if that's something that's feasible to do. I keep thinking about the cost over this period of time that's going to be expended on bottled water and the pollution with the plastic and all of that, and what are the alternatives for those areas that really have exceedances that are much higher, if to could give some thought to that. So I'm just wanting to know if you had any response.
Yeah, I can take a first stab at it, and there may be others that want to add into it. So I believe, the EAPs that I'm most familiar with all have anticipated, the potential point of use, point of entry systems, but we all do recognize, the comments that the Debbie and the others made, that we would not want to put in some type of a house system without testing for other co-contaminants, right? Because we would want to make sure that whatever system is installed is addressing not just nitrate. If there are other contaminants, that wouldn't make any sense whatsoever. So as part of the conversation we have been having with the SAFER program is, if we are in a situation where there are those co-contaminants, how would we in the SAFER program share basically the relative proportional cost for a unit for nitrate that the management zone would pay for, and then the proportional cost that the SAFER program would pay for the other co-contaminants, understanding that depending upon whether it's arsenic or 1,2,3 TCP or whatever the other co-contaminant might be, would be a different type of potential system or solution. So, that is, I believe, like I said, the EAPs I'm most familiar with have that built in as an option. And again, we're looking at it in conjunction with SAFER because of the issue of not wanting to install a nitrate point of view system when there may be other contaminants.
Okay. All right. I mean, I just think that now is the time to give some thought to that consideration. And again, that's where the community comes in to have them give some input to that as well.
And I even think the EAPs, it's not just community input, but it's the individual resident input, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. And I don't know if any of the other management zone panelists want to add to that, but you know, that is how it's currently being handled. I mean, it is definitely addressed in the EAPs as an option.
All right. Thank you, Tess.
I'll add just a little bit to that. In the long-term solutions in the final management zone proposals, those are the type of treatments that are going to be integrated into those plans, and where we will determine where those treatments are most appropriate and cost effective, and also cover the different constituents that Tess was talking about through cooperation with SAFER. So if we're getting, it was decided when the EAP was developed, we need to get water out quickly as we can. And these approaches we are describing are the quickest to get something out in rapid time.
Carl, do you have any questions for this panel?
Not really. My concerns are this. I have the same concerns. I think so well stated by Denise Cadera. And my other big concern goes back to sampling and the owner issue. That's already been discussed. I'm sure it's going to be discussed a lot more in another venue, but I think that it is one that has to be firmly answered. You know, you don't rent a house legally to a tenant with electrical hazards in it. And I think by the same basis, you shouldn't be renting a house that has poor quality water delivered to it. So with that said, and I realize, I think Tess Dunham has summarized their position. I think we've got to find an answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so at this point, we wanted to have an opportunity to open it up to public comment. We didn't have anybody that let us know in advance that they wanted to comment. So now would be the time if there's anyone that would like to make a statement. Keep in mind that, you know, we are going to be doing a Q&A, more of a open group discussion after public comment. So really this is to capture anything that may not be discussed there, or that any of our participants wanted to state. So I'd like to open it up and see if there is anyone here. You could raise your hand, your Zoom hand, or type your name into the chat.
For folks calling in, you could raise your hand by pressing *9.
Thank you, gentlemen.
I believe there was a couple of residents that CWC works with that were going to speak, and I believe the phone number on here that ends in 073 is Nydia, and she wanted to speak.
Okay. How about this? Why don't we start with, we have Christian Garcia has raised their hand, so we can maybe start there. And then I can go to ask if whoever is on the phone would like to. And then we also have Sandra Chavez. So let me just briefly remind you, because we do have a couple of hands coming up, that we will have, you have up to 3 minutes to provide your comment, but note that we are unlimited time. So again, we ask you to try and be succinct in your responses. So Christian, let's see, do you want to, we'll invite you to unmute yourself here.
I should be unmuted already.
Fantastic. Go right ahead.
Okay, so good afternoon. My name is Christian Garcia. I currently live in Sacramento, but my mother, father, sister, and over 30 other of my family members all live under the Tule management zone. and are exposed to unsafe drinking water every day that is contaminated with nitrate levels 2 times the legal limit. I went to school in Tipton and was aware early on of the unsafe drinking water that we experienced as Tipton residents. Collectively, the Thule Management Zone has significantly contributed to the unsafe drinking water that has impacted my family members. The law notes that the Thule Management Zone should have conducted community outreach to gauge the community's preference for drinking water solutions, but none of more than 30 family members that I have that live in the Thule Management Zone have been contacted by the Thule Management Zone, let alone do they know what the Thule Management Zone is or the harm they have caused their communities. Despite the harm they've caused us, the Thule Management Zone still wants the burden of accessing clean drinking water to fall on underserved low-income community residents. The only kiosk available to community residents now is nearly 30 minutes away from my parents' home in West Tipton. They plan to establish 2 more kiosks, but even then, their plan is woefully inadequate for Tipton residents. Towns within the Thule Management Zone are rural, and each community's individual needs should be considered when providing drinking water solutions. Instead of consulting community residents to adequately address the wide array of contaminants that my family members deal with on a daily basis, the Thule Management Zone dragged its feet to find ways to partner with the state and community stakeholders to develop a comprehensive and adequate plan for us. The Thule Management Zone could have split costs with the state to ensure that the community residents received comprehensive water solutions, but the Thule Management Zone is providing an inadequate plan that barely addresses the nitrate contamination in my family's drinking water and does not consider other contaminants that they deal with on a daily basis. This and the lack of engagement with the community demonstrates that the Thule Management Zone has not dedicated the effort necessary to provide clean drinking water to my family and their communities. The Basin Plan Amendment was developed to secure communities' human rights to drinking water, but the current plan would only serve as an obstacle to my community's right to clean drinking water. And that's it.
Thank you, Christian. Okay, so let's see, we'll go down and see, we have a resident, or we have someone on the phone. I'm asking you to unmute. If whoever has the phone number that ends in 073 could press *6, that will mute you if you would like to speak.
Can unmute using *9.
Oh, I'm sorry, *9, I apologize. Is *6 to raise your hand?
I could be wrong.
I believe it's *6 to unmute and
Okay.
*9 to raise the hand.
I just want to make sure that translation is providing these instructions to Lydia, who is a Spanish speaker.
Yes, so it is simultaneous interpretation. So whatever we're saying on this end is being translated into Spanish on the other channel.
Thank you.
So I will go ahead while we wait, because we're not hearing from that number. So how about Sandra Chavez? Would you like to go next?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Soy Cristóbal Chávez, padre de Sandra. Vivimos en la comunidad de Thule, la zona de Thule, en Porros Bio. Tenemos un pozo doméstico. Usamos el agua un promedio de más o menos de 20 personas. El agua está contaminada 4 veces más de lo normal.
Hi, I am Sandra Chavez. That was my dad just speaking. He said, we are from Porterville, California. We are from the Thule Management Zone. And we have a domestic well. And this domestic well is contaminated 4 times the maximum contaminant level. And there are about 20 people who live off of this water. And I would also like to add that, including these 20 people, there's also about 10 foster kids that my parents take care of who also drink from this water. And I would also like to add that we have lived here since 2003. We've been drinking this water since 2003. And in the year 2014 was when we found out that our well is contaminated. And since the year 2014 up until now, none of us have heard anything from the Thule management zone. No one from the Thule management zone has contacted us, nor have they contacted our neighbors or friends who also live in this area and who also live with contaminated water. We didn't even know that the Thule management zone existed until CWC invited them to a meeting, and this negligence is not acceptable. And I'd also like to add that personally, for our family, when we think of our contaminated water, we feel traumatized because of how harshly it has affected our family in the past. In 2014, we had to live for 6 months without water in our well. And we had to pump tanks of water so that we could use it in our home. And the hardest part about living with contaminated water is that when someone in our home becomes ill, we start doubting our water. For example, my mother has cancer, and it has been confirmed that it isn't hereditary. And her whole life, she has had a clean bill of health. She has been super, super healthy. Therefore, we feel obligated to blame the cause on nitrates. And this is just not acceptable in the US, that we feel like, oh, this is happening. My mother has cancer because of our contaminated water. Of course, we aren't necessarily basing it on facts, but the fact that we feel like that's happening shouldn't even be a thought. It shouldn't be something that would cross our mind. And of course, we feel that there needs to be a permanent solution. And in this moment in time, there isn't a permanent solution. So in terms of having either a filter or kiosk or bottled water, for us, a filter no longer works because of the level in which our well is contaminated. A kiosk, there's not all of us on this land can drive to a kiosk. And everyone who gets contaminated with water, who has contaminated water, deals with it differently, and everyone has a different situation. Therefore, a filter doesn't fit everyone. A kiosk isn't enough for everyone. And bottled water definitely would have to be the closest thing for us to an emergency solution, but it cannot stay as a permanent solution.
Thank you very much, Sandra. Is there anyone else who'd like to make a public comment? Again, if you can raise your Zoom hand to let us know.
I'm not seeing anyone.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, well, let's go ahead then and move into our final section, which is going to be the open discussion. I do want to remind everyone of the ground rules Jenilyn went over earlier, that we do have a limited amount of time for this discussion. So we want to make the most out of our time together and encourage folks to focus on topics that haven't already been discussed, or although I understand we didn't maybe fully discuss some of those, so I understand if they need to come back up. So let's see if, let's go ahead and kick this section off by, I will invite the board members. Are there areas you'd like to focus on first, or do you have any statements? If not, we can jump into asking our participants if they have questions.
Okay, yeah, you can jump into asking, but I would just like to comment that testimonial was exactly what I was talking about. Those people have not been contacted. They're living in a situation that's dire. They're impacted. They're still being impacted, and there's no help on the horizon. Residents have to be a part of the advisory guidance and because they're impacted. So I'll just leave it there, but you heard it from the people that are impacted. It's not affecting you, but it's affecting them.
These folks need an answer soon. First of all, they've been ignored for so long, that's not right. On the other hand, the Thule management zone didn't exist back when other folks were responsible for not talking to them about their problem. But that's not going to solve it. They need answers that get them fresh water, safe water. Thank you.
Thank you both. Okay, so at this point, again, we're going to have more of an open discussion. If you have specific questions, then I would encourage you can type this into the chat if you'd like to, or you can raise your hand. So if you have a comment or a topic you want to move into, please let me know by raising your Zoom hand, and we can get started.
Jessica, I don't have a Zoom hand. I don't have a reactions button, but I do have a quick comment or of an issue I'd like to raise for folks.
Sure.
So, and I meant to say this when I was talking about the SAFER coordination, but I do want to, one of the challenges that we've run into with coordination with the SAFER program is the SAFER program has an income verification requirement, and we don't for the nitrate program. And so that is one of the, there is some differences, as Perry indicated, the nitrate control program is available for anybody within the management zone, regardless if it's a green area or a red area. And two, we don't have an income verification for testing or for, an interim drinking water provision. As we look to coordinate with the SAFER program with respect to co-contaminants, they do have income verification issues, which could come into some challenge, especially when we start talking about point of use, point of entry systems, where there is more than just a nitrate contamination issue. And how does that work if, the nitrate component is in the home doesn't meet the income verification, but there's co-contaminants. So I just want to raise that is one of those challenges that I think we all face and are looking to figure out how we resolve, but it is something we've run into with the SAFER coordination issues.
Thanks, Tess. Are there any other folks that want to discuss that coordination between SAFER and the management zone process, or anything related to what Tess just brought up? Now we can probably move on to another topic if folks haven't something they would like to bring up. Oh, it looks like Perry. Perry, did you have something to say? Go ahead.
Yeah, we've talked about it quite a bit on this call, and I appreciate it. It's a very timely issue on this landowner permission. We have 2, 4, 5 days, and we have to put an application on our website or get our web person to get the application ready. And this is a Patrick question. Patrick, what should we do? I'm at a loss. We need direction somewhere on what to put in or not put into our applications. We had a Modesto Bee article run in our area, and we already have about 30 people signed up to get an application. I'm at a loss. What do we do, Patrick?
Well, I think realistically, what we are what we are strongly leaning to is approval of the current management zones, our early action plans, and continued work on the legal issues surrounding residents and landowners. And I think we'll also really try to take names of residents who are having issues or concerns with their landowner giving permission, or landlord giving permission, and see what we can do on our end, whether there are compliance and enforcement tools that could help aid the process. But until we hear otherwise from the Office of Chief Counsel, I am concerned with the issues relating to residents being able to, provide a third party, enter the premises, take a sample, and upload it to a state database. That was the concern that we kind of had early in this process. This information is incredibly valuable to us as an agency to make those kind of determinations, but this is a consistent issue across many state and regional board programs, and I don't know if this is necessarily the position that we kind of want to take right now, when there's, it puts the program at risk. I do think that there is sufficient sampling, like you've been saying, Perry. A lot of people are asking for this. Hopefully, this is the small minority of issues where we have a landowner objecting to their resident requesting to sample the well. But it's very significant. It's a very significant issue that I hope we can get to the bottom of and resolve one way or the other. But that's the direction we're kind of leaning in. I think that there's going to be a lot of good testing going on. We don't want to kind of stall the launch of the drinking water programs. I think, we have heard some of the concerns with respect to some of the management zones. But I think we're also, encouraged by the fact that just about all of the management zones are taking a approach where they do want to listen to the consumers' requests in their areas. So the bottled water requests, the working on the kiosks, all that type of thing, I think is something that can be ongoing. And this project was designed to evolve. So I think what we hear today will inform that process as we move forward. But I don't want to stall the good work that's going on. I think there are some areas where there needs to be a prod with respect to a couple management zones. But overall, I don't want to stop the positive momentum that's moving forward right now.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Perry. Thanks, Patrick. How about Sarah? Did you have a comment or question?
Yeah, it's on the same topic that's obviously really complex. In the Kauai area, one of the things we're talking about is using the data that's already in GeoTracker specific to drinking water wells, and that data that's collected by Irrigated Lands Coalition members. In the Kauai area, that requirement for the coalition members started last year. And so there are some records that are available to us where if that tenant and landowner issue were to pop up, we can go to GeoTracker and use those records that are already publicly available to determine if that domestic well would qualify for bottled water delivery specific to nitrate. So that is one of the things we're thinking about doing.
Because the bottled water delivery does not rely on I think that's an excellent point. It does not rely on 100%, rock solid confirmation that you're above the nitrate. If you're in a zone where your neighbor is tested above 10, your other neighbor is tested above 10, it may be the case where, we start providing bottled water before that test result comes through.
Great, thank you.
I would invite some comment on the data issues at the front end. I know a researcher, Iris, had some question about, and I don't know if Vicki, you'd be in position to answer this, but some question about releasing the information related to the development of kind of the plans to do additional sampling. I didn't realize that was a controversy up until quite recently. And just kind of your thoughts on that and the data availability issue. Recognizing that I think from the regional board's perspective, we aren't expecting a super fine-tooth comb there because it's not really data that's used for compliance purposes. That's going to be developed further on down the line. But just kind of, we're left scratching our head whenever somebody's asking for data and somebody else is reluctant to share it. Of course, there might be good reasons there, but if you could expound on any of those reasons, I'd appreciate that.
And Vicki, Vicki, before you answer, let me talk about at least the Valley Water Collaborative. That question was brought before the board of directors, and they are the ones that decided that after spending considerable resources to do the data analysis, that they preferred not to share that finished product. So it really was, Vicki and their good work was there, but the board of directors at that time decided that they didn't want to share the finished product. I mean, it was pointed out and they acknowledged. Go ahead.
I was going to say, let me clarify that it was, the development of the database, right? The data is public. The data is what the data is. That's been utilized. It's referenced and so forth. As we understand, the request from the CRLA or Santa Clara was for our transfer of the database that the collaborative developed, and is utilizing, right, with respect to the database itself. So I think there was some distinction between the data versus the database that was developed by the coalition. So I think I just want to make sure we're talking about what we're talking about as the two different things.
Yes, thanks, Tess. That's correct.
Maybe to add a little bit to that. So there are the vast majority of the data that were compiled were from the publicly available databases. And all of that is really to help inform, where we're estimating the nitrate, to occur within the upper zone. There is a little bit of data that, as I mentioned, was also collected from county health departments, environmental health. And so there is some data in addition to those entities, some other data, small bits of data that were asked to maintain confidence. So all of it just informs what we know about the distribution of the nitrate. And it doesn't hinder, as Perry mentioned earlier, it doesn't hinder, all of the outreach that is occurring everywhere and all of the well testing that is available everywhere to really refine what is understood about the distribution of the nitrate concentrations.
Oh, thanks. I think we'll keep thinking about it. I don't know if there's an easy answer. I think from the regional board's perspective, just to kind of what Carl and Denise has shared to me is while I don't personally kind of see any major concerns with the maps that were presented or kind of how the data is going to be used to kind of find those communities where we would need additional testing. It does raise a red flag, that there, and I'm not saying anybody was playing with the data in any way that raises concerns, but it's ordinarily the board's course of action to kind of see that data, use it to verify, what the type of statistical methods were used to, Kriging methods for developing those data sets, for developing the maps, just so that we're double checking on our end. But I think that's kind of the flag that was raised by Carl and Denise. And so we'll keep mulling that over, as we kind of work towards figuring out what to do with these plans.
If I may, this is Marisol from CRLA. So we were part of that request for that database. So Vicki, you mentioned that some of the data, it sounds like you guys were asked to keep it confidential. Was that data from a public source? It sounded like it was from the county public health department or some other department.
No, what I mentioned was after county departments, there were also other entities. So there were like irrigation districts or other entities, but it truly is a very small fraction of the entirety of the data set, related to what is available publicly. For example, not within the Modesto Turlock area, but within the East San Joaquin Water Quality Coalition area, which covers all or parts of 7 counties. I mean, that is, thousands and thousands of wells with data. And so there's a lot of information that we were able to use and to look at over the history of the record of the data, and then also to look at it more recently and to look at it more in the past 10 years or 20 years and determine, what provided the best available data set in order to do the best possible mapping of the nitrate distribution as we can know it today.
All right, thank you.
All right, are there any other comments or questions related to that topic? Or do we have anything else folks are interested in talking in the time we have left together?
Yeah, Nydia's still on the line, and so she's on the phone. She hadn't heard the translation since she's just on the phone. Because she doesn't, I believe she doesn't have the internet. So we're trying to get her to press *6. And if someone can, who's here speaking right now, who speaks Spanish, if you can maybe say that, maybe Nydia can hear us then.
I believe our translator can do a split, or an interpreter can do a split line, and I'm hoping that you can tell me if that's the case. Yes. Okay, so would you be able to translate if this other person comes on just through the phone line? Would you be able to translate into both? Well, I guess into English for us, but they will be hearing the caller. Is that correct? Your other person? Okay.
But they didn't hear the instructions in Spanish because there is no other line when you're on the phone. I was just told.
Okay. If they are, if we can get them to press the *6 and unmute, we can have them share their comment and we can translate it for them now. So I'm sorry that the translation apparently is not available on the phone line. We are recording this, so this will be the information will be available from that later. I know that doesn't help right now, but we can at least get their comment in if possible. So, yes, so could the translator tell the interpreter come on the English line and tell and in Spanish explain how to unmute for the public comment for the person who's on the phone?
From our experience in Korea, you need your translator to log out of the Spanish and you need them to log back into this other link. And then they'll be able to translate on this platform.
You should be hearing them now. Are you not hearing them? If you are not hearing them, you need to go down to the little globe at the bottom of your Zoom screen and select English. And then you'll be able to hear both those lines. If you're just off, you'll just be hearing the English line. Once you select English,
would y'all like me to tell residents to dial *6 in Spanish?
Yes, that would be great. Thank you.
I can say it right now in case they're on the YouTube. Para los residentes que hablaron por teléfono, si gustarían dar comentario, por favor, apuchen estrella 6.
Did everyone hear? I'm assuming everyone heard Natalie.
Yeah, I heard Natalie and the interpreter. I'm not really sure what's going on. Thank you all for helping.
Absolutely. So I still have the 073 number on here, but I'm not seeing it come off or on mute.
And does the host have it set so that people on the phone can unmute themselves?
Yes. while we continue to work on this, this issue, are there other folks that want to discuss any other topics? And then as we work through this, we can hopefully bring this other commenter on.
I'd just like to request a copy of the presentations today, if that's possible.
I think that's possible. I will look to our presenters to, I think they've shared those, right? We have a copy of those already. Looks like that's a yes.
Yes, we definitely have copies and we can get that sent out.
Thank you very much.
This Carl Longley, I hope that that other individual can get online, certainly. But we appear to be towards the end, and before this is wrapped up, I'd like to thank everybody who participated. This dialogue must continue, and I'm sure it will. There are issues raised today that we've got to find solutions to, and working together, I think we can find those solutions. When members of this group can't affect those solutions, then we have to find somebody who can, that person or individual or group that is will be able to affect those solutions. So once again, thank you very much. I appreciate folks pointing out their real thoughts on this. It wasn't much beating around the bush, and I do appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Carl. Oh, Perry?
Yeah, just one thing real quick. I can't speak for my other 5 counterparts, but we are, I would say I am, and I'm sure many others are open to be invited to give presentations at any of these community meetings where the program outreach can be explained. You know, we're doing that. We think we're covering all the bases, but I hear from groups that I've never heard of before in the last week or so that want us to speak. So I know we're more than, I think it's correct to say we'd all be more than happy to come speak and give presentations on these programs as they roll out.
Perry, and I'll continue to say, monthly food distribution is given out. That's where you have 40, 50, 80, 100 family members that are out there. Get someone out, find out from Food Bank, out of Fresno, Food Link, out of Danuba, I believe it is. Find out and get someone out to speak Spanish and ask questions, survey them, whatever you need to do. The public is there. You can't try to do outreach if you're not communicating with the public. Get to where the majority of a large number of the population is, and you can get information that you need to get on the spot that very same day. I'm encouraging you to do that seriously, if you want to respond appropriately and let the people that are impacted give their voice.
Yeah, thank you, Denise. It's on my list. Now I know that was a good point. That's a good point you brought up. It's going to be on our outreach list for sure.
Have JP, you have raised your hand.
Okay, yes, hi. I just wanted to, I'm JP Cataviello.
Hello?
Oh. Sounds like
Sorry to
someone else is
interrupt.
talking.
Did somebody?
My name is Eric Oriana, and I have got Nidia on the line. I had to call in, and she's also on this line, so I apologize for interrupting, but we're trying to find a way to get her to give her public comment.
No, not at all. Please, please have her do so. Thank you.
Nidia, por favor, de su comentario.
Ok, mi nombre es Nidia Medina de Orosi, miembro de la Voz de Vecinos Unidos. Juntos luchamos para que las comunidades tengan agua limpia. La contaminación de nitratos es uno de los más grandes problemas de la comunidad de East Orosi, que llevan más de una década con nitratos. Las familias de Estorosi no pueden usar el agua para tomar ni cocinar, solamente para bañarse y regar sus plantas. Cuando los niños se bañan, sus padres tienen que estar pendientes que no tomen el agua contaminada. También es muy poco el servicio de agua embotellada que le entregan. No es suficiente. Cuando se le terminan, los habitantes tienen que comprar el agua. Los rancheros causaron este problema de nitratos. Que paguen por los daños que provocaron. La zona de manejo tiene que parar con la contaminación de nitratos. Necesitan presentar mejores planes y tomar en cuenta las necesidades de las comunidades. Por la salud de todos los residentes de Estorosi, especialmente los niños. Miro el dolor, la angustia y desesperación de estos ciudadanos de Estorosi. Soy madre, abuela y bisabuela y no me gustaría que mi familia pasara por esta situación. Basta ya del sufrimiento. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much for commenting, and I'm so glad that we were able to, you had some folks that were able to find a solution. So thank you very much.
And I just want to voice, I appreciate the comment coming in. We've heard the concerns from Estorosi and the sufficiency of the bottled water provision services in that area. For the benefit of the other people on this call, I think we can get that particular comment translated from the recording and provided to the individual members of this call. Again, but thank you for the comment. I very much appreciate it.
Thank you. I do want to go back, JP, I apologize. We cut you off when you started your comment or your.
No need to apologize. I know how much effort you were putting into getting that comment included. My name is JP Cataviella. I work for Dairy Cares and the Central Valley Dairy Representative Monitoring Program. I just, on behalf of a fairly large group of our members who own and operate dairies and feedlots in the Central Valley and are subject to the nitrate control program, I know a big part of today is about really, the discussion of the adequacy of these plans, and rightly so. It's been a good discussion, and I've listened to it, the different perspectives with interest. I want to use the opportunity to share my observations about the work that has been done in the last few months. I've watched a number of people who some of whom have been working together for years to try to get these projects off the ground, but a whole lot of new people representing diverse groups of dischargers and community members get together to try to put together, kind of from scratch, a pretty amazing effort, local, a new type of effort. And so I guess I just wanted to make the point here that I'm really proud of the work that I've seen done by a lot of different people, especially these management zone leaders in the past few months. I think I've seen honest, good faith efforts from virtually everybody to really try to listen to the different perspectives they're getting and to do a good job putting these plans together and to and try to meet both the spirit and the letter of what the water board's trying to do here. We've been given a chance to try to do something new. It's a really, as Patrick alluded to at the beginning of this, it's a different type of approach to regulation. And, I think it's a pretty bold experiment. I'd say so far it's going well, but the proof is really going to be before us. We need to keep it up and make sure that we can deliver on the intent and promises that we're making here to do a good job getting this water out to the communities. But I just didn't want to let the day pass without at least, sharing my gratitude with all the people who've worked so hard to get us this far. Thank you.
And I'd just like to comment, I understand and I fully agree with what you're saying. I'm proud of the efforts that has come forth to date. My only issue that I continue to raise is that we can spend the money, and we can take the time and we can develop the plans, but if it doesn't hit the goal, then I won't say it's for naught, but we haven't fully succeeded in what we're doing. Listening to the testimonials today are a perfect example. So it's just important that we keep moving the ball and keep moving the ball till we get to the goal line and cross over. And I think that's what the discussion is. And we can't take anything away from the efforts that the management zones have done, but we do have a lot more to do, and extending that outreach to the communities that are impacted is foremost my primary concern. And so I thank all of you that have been on this call, and the discussion has been open, it's been genuine, and I continue to look forward to results that benefit those impacted communities. Thank you very much.
I really want to thank you, Denise. I know our time is running short, and I want to make sure that Carl gets the last word in as well. I just want to also comment, kind of echoing what JP said and hearing what the advocates discussed today. I do think it's remarkable. I went into this program, CV Salts in general, skeptical of whether the regional board, which is a discharge permitting agency, could really take this foray into a drinking water program on itself, implement this program with the resources that we have at our disposal without significantly raising the amount of people that we have working on these type of projects, and whether the regulated community would really rise to the occasion here. I am, as an attorney, I think we're bred to be cynics, but I am incredibly enthusiastic and humbled and proud of the effort that the dischargers have come up with here. It is really, I think, in just about all cases, a good faith effort to provide for the needs of the community while they work on long-term drinking water solutions. The early action plans, I think, were just about where we would hoping that they would come in. There's a lot of groundwork being done. It is uneven, and I think that that's to be expected. We have management zones that cover almost 50,000 people, and we have management zones that cover a few thousand people. Deploying resources evenly across those management zones is going to be a challenge. Figuring out how to interact with those community members in those areas is going to be a challenge and will continue to be a challenge. It's a work in progress. I give a legal talk on the history of the Clean Water Act and note that it took them about 12 times over the course of about 60 years to get that thing right. The fact that we are now kind of in implementation just a few years after this program was approved initially by the regional board is truly remarkable. We've come a long way. And I do want to thank everybody, even though we may have nits to pick or places that we want to go, the effort that's been put into these things thus far has really been extraordinary. And I don't want to lose sight of that. We're going to keep chipping away at it. There's still going to be controversies that we're going to work to address, but we're going to keep working on it on our end. And with that, I'll turn it over to Carl for the last word. And I do want to thank real quick Jessica and the Office of Public Participation for helping make this happen. It's with the strategic planning effort and the April board meeting, it's like 3 board meetings in the span of about a month. An OPP really helped out quite a bit with a couple of those, making it happen. And I want to extend my thanks to you for that.
Well, thank you, Patrick. Words well said. And I once again thank everybody for participating in this. There's a lot of folks, as you pointed out, Patrick, that have been working on this very hard for quite some time. And, when we sat down, not looking at nitrate, but looking at salt first in 2006, few of the people on today were there. And that's been a long time. And these programs are difficult to initiate. I think a lot of good work's been done, but we're not done. We got a long ways to go. And with that, we can't, this program with emergency water is very important, but we cannot forget that we have to continue working to the point where people are getting clean water at the tap. And that's the ultimate outcome. And that can't be 20 years or 10 years from now. It has to be sooner. So with that said, we need to have that discussion. I think with the infrastructure bill that's coming down the road, I'm hoping that we can get some funds out of that maybe to work towards getting the pipe in the ground where we have to put pipe in the ground. But we have to work we have to find a mechanism to address the institutional problem of maintenance, of technical competence of the folks that are operating the systems, of the financial issues, and all of those things. And that's going to be a very difficult discussion by itself, but we need to have that discussion soon. If we're going to go to the point where folks can walk into their tap and with confidence turn it on, or the shower on, for that matter, and ensure that there is clean water there that's not dangerous. So with that, thank you very much. We'll see you in the next one, and have a good day. Bye.
All right, thank you very much, everyone. We appreciate you being here. Again, we are recording these sessions, and I apologize. I'm not sure where the recordings are typically housed. So maybe can one of the
we can arrange that through Ann. I think we can make those available to you.
Okay, fantastic. So regional board staff will follow up on that. Great. All right. Thank you, everyone.
I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting.
Thanks, Gene.
You bet.